Hello, everybody, and welcome back to yet another installment in our Fringe Roundup Reviews 2024, our third annual season of doing these. You will have already seen part one with our co-artistic producer, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz, as well as our co-associate producer, Ms. Jillian Robinson. And now we are into part two out of the three. There is still a third part coming. We saw that many. Ryan, how many shows did we see altogether?
I think it's about 40, give or take,
It's a
between the
little
three
over
of us.
half of the festival.
Yeah, I think I saw 32, just me, but there was a lot of overlap between the three of us. So I think it will.
Yes,
be
this is the
covered.
first year where we had more overlap than other years, where it's been a bit more separate.
Yeah, which is good because dialogue is fun and we can actually converse about the shows. Yes,
it is fun. It is fun. But Ryan and I have a next batch of shows to do before we'll get to part three, where Jill will be back and it'll be all three of us together, just like old times. But in the meantime, Ryan, let's ask the age-old question: what is in your cup today?
Oh, okay. So ancient. So I am fighting off a bit of a little cold now, which thankfully didn't start coming until after Fringe was over, which I appreciated. Thank you, cold. So I do have some tea to soothe the throat. Apologies if I sound a little raspy or coffee throughout this.
Unacceptable.
Tea. So I have my tea in my cup. There you go. You can see that. But because this is also a lengthy episode with lots of shows to get through, I do have water, which is also good for rest and fluids that are required for fighting off a cold. But I expect to run out of breath after a certain point. So having a bottle of water is always handy.
Look at you being proactively smart.
Trying. How about you, Mac? What's in your cup?
I'm just having some Crystal Light from my classic silver tankard as usual. Tonight,
classic.
Nothing too fancy there. And I also see you wearing your Fringe button.
Yes, tip the Fringe, folks. All proceeds of ticket sales go to the artists. So tip the Fringe if you want the Fringe to survive.
Yes, I did tip, but I have it strapped to my backpack so I can walk around with my Fringe backpack.
Ah, gotcha. Yes.
So it is not in front of me at the moment.
I had mine on the lanyard of my press pass over the course of the festival. If you ran into me during Fringe, you'd see me walking around with this. So official. I'm a journalist. Don't shoot at me, but I'm a critic, so you probably want to. But now I have taken it off to put it on my shirt because I don't need to be wearing a press pass to be recording this, nor did I need to be wearing one then.
True. All right. Well, Ryan, what do you say we get into our first show, which is one you and I both saw?
Mm-hmm.
Which was Stiff & Sons by Bear Theatre Collective. It was written by Aidan Govea and was directed by Daniel Reel. And we actually just spoke about this show because Trudy, when she was on the episode, she brought up the fact that this show did do a run in the Barrie Fringe last year. So there's a Barrie connection to this show.
Thanks,
but
Trudy.
Ryan, what were your thoughts on Stiff & Sons?
Okay, so this one was a hoot. Always love starting on a positive note with these kinds of roundups. So the basic premise of this show is that Stiff & Sons refers to a family-run funeral home by the Stiff family. Their recently deceased father has left it to the two sons, David Stiff and Darren Stiff, played by Tim Walker and Jack Rennie, respectively. And they're both doofuses. David is a bit of a lovable doofus, and Jack is a bit of an unlovable doofus. No, sorry, Jack's character, Darren, is a bit of an unlovable doofus. And David is married to Pamela Stiff, played by Manon Enns Lapointe. And apologies across the board, as always, if we mispronounce anybody's name.
Yeah.
And they have a daughter named Erin, played by Izzy Nagel, who has a sister puppet and named Karen. So she walks around with a puppet on her hand who she believes is a separate entity from herself and maybe even is
demonic.
Possibly demonic. And she is very much, I don't think anyone's clever for pointing out that she's a bit of a Wednesday Addams type, a bit of a macabre little girl. And there's two of her because of her puppet and friend, sister. And that's the family unit. But the basic setup is that they're not doing well financially. They're in a bit of a dire states. Darren,
because everybody's going to Florida and not dying there.
Exactly. Yeah, who wants to die
Northeast?
Who wants to die in? Is it explicitly set in Toronto? I actually don't recall if that's ever stated. But
they don't say Toronto, but they more just mention that's like up north, kind of like northeast.
Yeah, right. Okay, but area. It's a very undesirable place to die, if ever there was one.
Too many young hippies in town.
Yeah. So nobody's dying, and the older population is all dying elsewhere. So Darren, who is sleeping with his brother David's wife Pamela, secretly, but very not so secretly, they're pretty explicit about it. He and Pamela hatch a plan that they can maybe drum up more business by killing people with poisonous
Stick to
sandwiches.
priest.
Yes, to have a little priest. Yeah, so, obviously the Sweeney Todd references are very palpable. A lot of
Yes.
people I've seen compare it to Little Shop of Horrors, especially
That too.
with a killer puppet on hand, I think is
Yep.
a pretty apt comparison. But all of this kind of sets into motion when Aaron and Karen accidentally murder her nanny, Olga,
Slash
who is
cleaning lady.
nanny slash cleaning lady Olga, who is
Yes.
one of the many, many characters played by our final cast member, Jonas Trottier. Trottier,
Yes.
again, apologies for pronunciations, who is the real MVP of this production. He plays at least like 20 or 30 different
Yes.
characters. He is credited in the program
Yep.
as just everyone else.
Yep.
And we'll get more into what's so cool about him in particular. But yeah, so when she accidentally kills her and cleaning lady slash nanny, which wasn't maybe so much of an accident. She thinks it was an accident, but it was kind of deliberately calculated.
Because they set it up that way. They swapped the kits.
She was trying to practice embalming with a toy. Yes, well, we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when an accidental murder leads to a surprise financial payoff, plans are hatched to actually maybe try to save the business, but also finance Pamela's desire to be a big success in Hollywood, and Darren's desire to run off with her in that pursuit. But oh no, pesky David and his good old moral compass is getting in the way. If only he would have some kind of unfortunate accident that may or may not involve a shovel that kind of puts him out of commission. We are kind of spoiling a lot of this, but this is after
I was
the
about
Fringe.
to say, do we have a spoiler
I think
put up on the screen?
I would say across the board, expect that there will be spoilers. This is post-festival coverage. If there's ones that we specifically know are touring, we will put a button on and try to have more of a spoiler, non-spoiler section. But this one, I think, there's just no way to talk about it without spoiling. And it's the kind of show that you can't even really spoil. The premise sort of spoils itself. So we can be selective about when we want to signal that, but just assume that from this point on with all of these shows, there may be spoilers. Apologies. So that's kind of the basic setup, and it's all about just the wacky shenanigans that these characters get into. I thought this was great. I've spoken a lot already. Do you want to comment on your general thoughts?
I mean, Trudy got me excited when she said this was a Barry show, so love that. But I mean, oh my goodness. So many times in comedy, the show doesn't own what it is. There are so many shows that just say they're one thing and then don't go for it. You always feel like, oh, if you just went a bit further, you would have gotten it. And this show knew what it was. They go, this is a broad Three Stooges style comedy. We have people getting hit in the head with shovels. We are murdering people with formaldehyde and embalming them. We have people getting locked in coffins. David should have died many times over getting hit in the head that many times. Or just the fist fights that the Darren and David have with each other, where he's just on him in the face. It's just so big and hammy. There's the great news montage where Jonas is stealing the show, playing all these different characters. It's Looney Tunes. It's big. And they go for it. They're not trying to be comedy, but still real at the same time. They just went, nope, we are just going for it, and the audience and myself love them.
Yeah, mine too.
For it, that's something I appreciate, because there's too many shows that just say, "Oh yeah, I'm a comedy," but it's okay. Well, if you're going to be a comedy, that means you're going to have to risk offending people sometimes, because comedy isn't always for everybody. A joke that works for one person may not work for the other person, because comedy is subjective, just like art in general. But it's comedy is one of those things where it's Mel Brooks. This is a very Mel Brooksian style comedy. And Mel Brooks is someone who never pulled a punch. He is someone who owned the comedy. Blazing Saddles is a great comedy because he owns the situation and just goes for it and goes, yeah, these people are horrible, racist human beings who are going to go after their black sheriff. And the comedy comes from, how does he deal with this situation and outwit these people? Nowadays, if you were to try to do a Blazing Saddles or this type or some type of comedy like that, you couldn't, because people would be too afraid to actually go for it, compared to Mel Brooks, who just went, nope, we're gonna go for it. And that's what this comedy did too. This comedy just said, we are what we are. We're gonna show a child murdering people. We're gonna go full Looney Tunes, over the top violence. and we're just going to own it and have a blast doing it. And the audience let loose. I'm like, I saw several comedies this season. This one got the biggest laugh of all of them. Like, people were loving it. People were loving it because it was just being funny. And I'm sure there was some comedy that people did not enjoy in this, because there were some jokes that were like, whoa, okay, we're going really dark on this. Let's go for it. Like,
yeah. What else? I kind of want to chime in on that, because while this is like a textbook example of what might get called a dark comedy, the darkness exists in the premise, but it doesn't actually exist in the show. Like, they treat it with such lightness, and it really just kind of, and because I think, like you said, it lives in this Looney Tunes space that, like, it's impossible to take this too seriously, which I say as a compliment, that even if you think like I can't imagine anyone even having you can't joke about these things reaction, because these characters are basically made of plasticine. Like, you can't take it seriously in the way that maybe some other dark comedies that we'll talk about later on in this episode kind of have a more of a difficult time balancing that line, where they also want to be taken seriously in that way. But yeah, like, I just think in general, the newscaster montage with Jonas as the interviewer and everyone he's interviewing, that is just, it is high praise. That's probably the best comedy montage I saw during this Fringe, in a Fringe that also had a Sex T-Rex show featuring tons of comedy montages. That was incredible. I thought the premise was so funny. The characters are ridiculous. And I love the playfully way that it leaned into the artifice with all the cardboard props that have these very on-the-nose labels explaining exactly what they're supposed to be.
Not a toy.
Well, that's the thing. Like, most of them are just coffin, shovel. Like, you could just see what it is. But the not the toy versus toy kit is the perfect payoff to that convention, because it allows the audience to have almost an X-ray specs vision of what they're looking at. Whereas the characters think these two things are identical, and we get the dramatic irony of knowing they're not. And it wasn't even just in terms of the cardboard set pieces. That's also when Darren and Pamela have their scenes of intimacy. It's stylized similarly with making out is how they did it, or having sex. Like, everything was so unreal that it just, kind of allowed itself to live in that cartoonish space where you can get away with this kind of story, not taking itself seriously, even if on paper it sounds like it maybe should. And I think there's just so much to love about this. Do you have any other thoughts? I have quite a few others, but I'll let you kind of chime in if you have anything else you want to say.
I mean, this whole cast had great chemistry. Like, I solid chemistry. They really had good pacing on the piece. Like, that was something that comedies live or die by, is pacing. And we'll get to shows that, maybe sometimes struggle with a bit of pacing. But like, this one really understood that in order to sell this type of plasticine Looney Tunes style comedy, you cannot let the audience have a moment to sit back and go, that doesn't make much sense. He's getting hit in the head with a shovel and surviving. He should be dead in that coffin.
And it's not even just that, like, it doesn't give us a moment to question it. It sets up the unreality so well that to question it feels stupid. And I think if they can pull off that difficult needle, like, that just works so well. If I have one kind of even minor critique about the script, and especially I would call this more of a script critique, is that there are times when I feel like it's written in a way where it maybe doesn't trust its audience as much as I feel like it should. Like, I noticed a few moments of this. I didn't write down all of them, but one in particular that does call to mind is when Pamela, she jokingly refers to Aaron as being like Wednesday Addams or something about the Addams family. And everybody in the audience was thinking that. I don't think you needed to say it explicitly. And I did notice a couple things that sort of lived in that zone. That's almost like they're trying to beat the audience to the punch. Like, oh, you thought you noticed something funny? Well, we noticed it too. And but if you were to just stand those things out, this is like a pretty flawless piece, a pretty flawless script, so well directed, so well acted. Like, everyone in the cast was really bringing their A game. I do want to give a special shout out to Izzy Nagel in particular, who plays Erin and Karen, because she's playing two very different but very
that puppet work was
characters.
Incredible.
Oh my God, so good. And like, I've seen her before. I actually feel like I saw her in a Zoom production of a Shakespeare play. I think it was like As You Like It during the pandemic. And it was one of the most naturalistic performances of a Shakespeare character I think I've ever seen from a young person. Maybe not ever in life, but certainly from, like, I don't know how old she is, but she seems quite young. She's playing an 11-year-old in this. I'm sure she's older than that. But what a very impressive actor. Definitely one to watch out for. But everyone is so good in this. Jack Rennie, you would have, I think, seen him as Dracula in the Eve of St. George, I believe he played
Yes,
Dracula in that.
yes.
He's very good. He
Yep.
co-wrote and directed one of the plays we reviewed in Fringe last year, the Fatal Charade, which I thought was very
Right.
good. So again,
Yep.
all these very talented people coming together to pull off this
Yep.
very impressive, if very dumb show. But because it's so dumb, just makes it even more impressive.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I hope this show has great legs and that it continues to travel. And I mean, this would be a great piece to put somewhere, in like a studio theater at Stratford or a small theater like that, or even like the CAA theater with Irvish. Like this show could sell easily. Like it's a fun family show.
Family business.
Family business. There you go. Yeah, no, it's a solid show. I thoroughly enjoy it. So
yeah, great.
Awesome. All right, Ryan. Next up, we have Cabaret of Murder, which Ryan, you and I both saw, and it was by the company Blair Morrow.
Yes, who is just the writer and director of the piece, but listed himself as the company.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And they came from several great fringes out west, and so this was done over at Alumni Theater. Yep, there you go, right there. Yep, Brian's got them. They had great fans that you could use as well, and so. Ryan, what are your thoughts on this particular piece, Cabaret of Murder?
Yeah, well, speaking of murder...
so it was like, you planned it that way.
I tried to give some sort of thematic through line. Doesn't always work. We have 3 shows about restaurants that I put back to back that we'll get to later, but whatever. I try my best. It doesn't always work. Okay, so yes, Cabaret of Murder. I enjoyed this one a lot. I don't think it's like a perfect show. I do think there are some sort of conceptual flaws that I will get into, but I thought this was a really good time. So we are basically presented with a trio of performers. I have their names here. Bella Kiccione. Again, apologies across the board for everyone's pronunciations. And I met all of them and thought they were lovely people, but apologies about your names. Katie Rose Connors and Paulina Pino Rubio. So we have these 3 ladies who are presenting pieces of art that all have one strange little bit of trivia in common, is that all of them have on some level been authored by a mass murderer or serial killer.
Yep.
And that is what this is. It is exactly what the title implies. It is a cabaret of murder. They've just found, through some probably interesting research, cobbled together all of these pieces of art that indicate that some of the most violent people in recent history have indeed had artistic aspirations and created works of art. Some of them are songs, some are poems, some are stage plays. So we have a couple. There's a screenplay in there too. And it's just presenting the work that these people created. And we have, I forget the whole list of, we had Ted Bundy in there, we had Jeffrey Dahmer, we had John Gacy,
Charles Manson, was the last one.
Yeah, the Virginia Tech shooter. I don't recall. I wish I took better notes on this one, but I was kind of very enraptured and was just like letting it wash over me. But the Virginia Tech
Paulina
shooter.
Did that one where she spoke it and they had the translation going on.
The one of the Virginia Tech shooter whose name I don't remember. He was the only one I think who wrote stage plays and had 2 plays in particular, which was kind of like near the end is sort of what we focused on. So so we're basically just here is art created by violent, dangerous people who've committed heinous crimes.
Serial killers.
Yeah, serial killers and mass murderers in particular. And like, I know like there's other things we could probably think of about how, hey, Hitler was a painter, but like we're not really dealing with the historical things.
You can paint an entire room in one afternoon. 2 coats.
Well done.
Thank you.
But it's really leaning into serial killers and mass murderers in particular, not genocidal autocrats in that kind of way.
That's a whole different show they're going to do.
It
That's
is, I suppose it could be. And I think while I thought this was very stimulating and entertaining, and I think a lot of the comedy from it came from, man, how bad is so much of this art? But I guess what I feel like was missing from it, and what I maybe would have liked to see a little more, is some element of more commentary on the works themselves, and specifically what the company is maybe excavating about these works, about what do they maybe tell us about the relationship between art and violence, or the proclivity of violent people to create art, or the proclivity of violent people to create artistic works, and vice versa. I don't know if I jumbled that well. But it's like, I don't necessarily, because if I said that the last show maybe had a few too many spoon-feedy moments, I guess and this was probably a reasonable calculation made by the company that they didn't want to spoon feed the audience of here's what you're supposed to think about it. I kind of do think it is interesting that they just like, here are the works and now go home and think about it. And I have continued thinking about it. I can't tell watching it if that's just them wanting to send us home with that kind of reaction, or if it is just that they themselves haven't really contemplated this. And I do like, and I don't know, because I do think, this feels like a thoughtful piece, but the thought is very much absent from it, or at least from the surface of it. And I don't know. That's something that, as much as I did enjoy it, I felt like it wasn't necessarily going far enough with this very interesting premise. Yeah. And again, that's just one suggestion of something that they maybe could done, like kind of had some sort of element of a treatise on what it means that so many of these violent people are artists and so many artists turn out to be violent people. Or maybe even something else just about what we can learn about these specific crimes through the art created by its perpetrators. But a lot of that stuff is just, withheld from us in here in a way that provokes thought, but also feels like we're shortchanged some thought that should have come from the show itself. I don't know. Does that make sense? Was it similar to your reaction?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, for me, so not to be creepy, but I do love my good true crime podcasts.
This is a show for you.
I know, that's why I picked it. Because I was like, I have my Canadian true crime I listen to. I got my American retired profiler analysis that she does every week with like a different killer. Great podcast, Killer Psyche. Check it out. Candace DeWong. Love it. But I mean, like, I did know about some of them being art people, like John Wayne Gacy, because Killer Psyche had just done that episode on John Wayne Gacy, 2-part episode on John Wayne Gacy, where she actually did interview his lawyer from later on in his life after he was in prison, and there was the whole fight about his art staying his execution. So she actually got to talk to his defense lawyer about that, and she talked about how she basically he would only talk to her, basically no other like all the other male lawyers at the firm couldn't get him to cooperate or do things with the judge like she could. So I agree with you. Like, I like the fact that we got to see these pieces, because there's some I didn't know about. Some of the audience didn't know at all. So there's somewhere like I knew who they were talking about before they introduced them. So I was like,
nice.
There's a few of those, oh moments there, which was really great. So that was fun for me. But I mean, I agree. I would love to see them go further with this. Like, I would love to see them maybe select 3 or 4 out of all the ones they did. Like, shrink it down a bit, cut a few out, but then connect them more and have more of that interaction between them about the piece, where they either explore it in another way, like break it down a bit more. Like, it's like, hey, this sucked. Like what could we do better about it? Like, why did they write it this way? Like something that explored these art pieces more than just saying, here's a scene from the Virginia Tech Polytech shooter, and his play ends very abruptly like that, where it's like he's shoving the candy bar down the guy's throat, where the one play ends. But it's like, okay, so what am I supposed to go away with this and think about this more like? Because they come out after the show ends and say, hey, we're donating our proceeds to this victim support organization, because the victims of these people are still living. Some of their family members are still living with the pain of this, and this is an organization that helps with that. And it's okay. Well, if we're going that way, then let's dive more into this and go, does their art humanize these people who have done these horrible things? Stimulate me a bit more. Like, don't just show me their art. Show me something more to it. You know what I mean? Because like, their art is fascinating. Don't get me wrong. Seeing some of the work they do and some of the things they have written is truly interesting to go. Why is it so many of these serial killers are also have some type of artistic connection? Like,
but it's also not just that it's fascinating. It's also it's fascinating how bad so much of it is, and I think that is. Well, no, but and I'm not saying like, but if these people had been great artists, maybe they wouldn't have been killers. Right. And I don't think they're trying to say this too, but like, a part of me wonders, like, what if it was good? I would have liked to see some examples where it actually was good, and then maybe have to grapple with that. But it's like we're constantly presented with this bad art, and I think invited to point and laugh at how bad it is, or at least just. And I don't know, like, I'm not saying like it's necessarily like icky to do that, because these are heinous people who I don't know, don't necessarily deserve our sympathy or aesthetic.
These people
appraisal.
are mass murderer, genocidal maniacs. No,
but
they deserve no sympathy.
And that's not where I'm going with this. But I am saying that it maybe would have made the lack of commentary would have felt more warranted if it was just, wow, you saw a great work of art and now we tell you that Charles Manson made it, and then you have to think about how you feel about those two things. But when you're presented with just this, like, the worst written play I've ever seen, and then told the Virginia Tech shooter made that, I'm like, okay, that sounds about right, I guess. Like, I don't know. Like, it's, yeah. And I was talking to Blair after the show. I introduced myself to him, very nice guy. And he told me something else that I thought was interesting, and maybe we'll just wrap up with this, is that when they were touring this at one of their other fringes, I think last year, one of the three actors got sick, all of whom are amazing, by the way.
They are. Shout out to all of them, because they all work so well together. Like,
such a perfect team. They've clearly been doing this for a while.
Cohesive.
Yeah, but at one of their previous stops at Fringe, Blair was telling me that one of them got sick and couldn't do it, and this was probably closer to scary COVID times also. So what they did is that they brought in a revolving door of other Fringe artists at the Fringe, kind of similar to the show I saw last year, Insert Clown Here, where
Clown Here.
It was less improvisational. They just did it with script in hand. But as a result, they won the Spirit of the Fringe Award that year, because that really does feel like the perfect cohesive harmony. And that's the thing, because all of this is pre-written material that just kind of exists, and the point is I'm basically performing it to you, it kind of works with anyone could step in and do it, and there is this sort of rough around the edges feel, even if it does, in the version we saw, feel very polished by having these three excellent performers memorize it and perform it in this very stellar, almost clean, veneered way. So anyway, I thought this was a fun show. I just, you know, the more I think about it, the more I kind of wish there were additional things they had done with it. And I'm just spitballing. I'm sure they can come up with plenty of other different things that I haven't even thought of here.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, that's the thing there, where it's like, this is a great premise. Like, I would love to see the show develop further. Like, absolutely. There is, like, this topic about serial killers and art is truly something that I don't think enough people have explored about. Either why do they make art to begin with? Like, what is it about them that, because a lot of people who, like, you know, Manson brought people in because he was this hippie artist guy, you know, like, their art does speak to people. There are groupies out there who, you know, people bought John Wayne Gacy's art. And, and I mean, that's why he had to go to court, was because he wasn't giving the money from the art sales where it should have been going. He was fighting that in court. So it's like, there are people who were fascinated, interested in what they had to say and what they wrote. So, you know,
I guess
there's more, there's definitely more to mine here. And I think outside of Fringe 60-minute thing, like, I would say go to 90 minutes and really expand this out a bit and dive in and excavate a bit more, because you got good nuggets here that can go much further.
And there are also, like, some of the vignettes, I'm pretty sure I would be reluctant to even call them art, not because as a statement on their quality, but some of them were just like proclamations that were made on in the middle of a trial, or possibly like right before they were executed. And like, do we call this a poem or a speech, or like, is this even art? I feel like some of them could be cut to make room for others. And what I feel like is really missing from here is like a Hannibal Lecter type, somebody whose murder is their art. Whereas, you know, and I get that's fantastical and maybe doesn't exist in the real world, or is harder to find. But
well, technically, Hannibal Lecter did exist. His name was Ed Gein.
But
right? Like,
was
that's
he
what inspired him?
But was he an aesthete in the way that Hannibal Lecter
no,
is?
God, no. He was a farmer bumpkin.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that, if only Hannibal Lecter was real. I'm saying if there was a real Hannibal Lecter type who did murder as an aesthetic experience, more so like the Mads Mikkelsen version than any of the other versions.
Well, according to Donald Trump, the late great Hannibal Lecter is alive and, you know, should be honored. So
great. Love that for him. Shall we move on?
Let's move on. Okay, so the next one is one that you did by yourself, Ryan. It is the one called, let's see here, Rat Academy by Bat Rabbit Productions. So Ryan, tell us about this piece.
Okay, so this one was not on my initial list of things I wanted to see, but as Fringe kept going on, and I was talking to people that I ran into and saying, oh, what's good? What have you seen? Without fail, people would say Rat Academy. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's a good one. And I kept hearing it over and over again. And then it did get patrons pick in the Theater Pass Marai main space. So on a whim, I decided I got to see this Rat Academy and find out what all the hype is about. And I'm so glad I did, because Rat Academy is delightful. So this is a two-hander clown-esque show. It is presented or created by Katie Yoner, apologies about pronunciations, Dania Lee Hoffman, and Joseph McManus. McManus directed it, and Katie and Dania were the two performers. They played Shrimp and Fingers, respectively, who are these two delightful furry rat characters. They wear these excellent costumes that were designed by Megan Sweet. And the premise here is that this is something I did not know. I believe these performers come from Alberta originally. And Alberta is one of the few places in the world that has no rats. That a number of decades ago, there was a very successful campaign to exterminate all of the rats in the province. And
do that.
There are articles.
We got to do it here.
I skimmed some articles about it. It didn't feel very germane to this review, but yes, that is part of an interesting tidbit about Albertan history and also, I guess, the culture today, because rats are absent. And you say that we should do that here, but I feel like this show is a pretty good argument for why you shouldn't, because we are introduced to the last two surviving rats in Alberta, who are the most whimsical, delightful characters you're likely to see on stage in a Fringe festival this year. Their names, like I said, are Fingers and Shrimp, and they have a real Pinky and the Brain dynamic in terms of one of them is the kind of world-wise, angry, smart one. That's Fingers. And Shrimp is this kind of lovable idiot, but very charming character.
I don't know, Brian. What are we going to do today?
Exactly. So the academy of the title refers to the fact that Fingers is trying to teach Shrimp, and by extension, the audience, and there is a lot of audience participation in this, the lessons about how to be a rat. And it comes down to a few different lessons. There is how to steal, and with a very simple lesson, how to steal, just take. And we get through funny sketches of Fingers trying to teach Shrimp how to do that, but Shrimp is really bad at it. And it gets very sad when Fingers takes anything from him, her. I actually don't know what the genders of these rats are supposed to be. Both performers are female, but let's just call them. Then there's a lesson on how to sniff. And the kind of most substantive part of the show is a lesson on how to not die, which comes in 3 parts: hide, fight, and run. And then over the course of it, Shrimp, doesn't necessarily love the fact that Fingers is very anti-human and decides to hijack the lesson to teach a lesson in trusting and loving humans. And this show is so good. This has been a very good Fringe for clown shows in particular, and especially these kinds of minimally verbal clown duos, others that we'll talk about in part 3 of this roundup, like Monks and Colonial Circus, I think are very appropriate points of comparison to this. But there's been a lot of clown in general in this Fringe, Madame Winifred's Circus of Wonders, that we'll also talk about in part 3. And there was another show, Tonight a Clown Wants to Be Loved, which I didn't get to see, but I heard was maybe a similar vibe to this. But I do think Monks, which again we'll talk about more in a bit, is a very good point of comparison, a very instructive frame of reference for talking about this, because there's also an interesting thing in here about a concluding message about recognizing the value of friendship. There's a really great line where Fingers cries out, "We were supposed to hang out," which, seeing this after I saw Monks, I'm like, oh, there's a through line or a theme across a lot of these Fringe shows. But yeah, this is just some amazing physicality and vocal performances. Shrimp in particular is basically incomprehensible. Talks in this I can't even do it. I don't know how she did it, but it was just sounds like she's talking through some sort of weird voice filtration system, but it's just amazing. It's the best possible kind of incomprehensible. It's so cartoonish, and the set was designed by Claire Sonmore, and they have all of these funny garbage props. They're in a bit of a trash refuse heap, but the garbage is all painted in these colorful colors that they look like it exists in a cartoon, which is all really well done. They have a magic 8-ball that they refer to as God, and that's what they use to kind of get advice. Again, I'm just listing funny things about this show that I thought was really good. There's one point, again, they said there's a lot of audience participation where they make a reference to Die Hard, which is really funny, and then they seek out a bald man in the audience who they think looks enough like Bruce Willis that they can play out a scene from Die Hard. And this very tough looking bald man that they brought onto the stage, at least in the version I saw, which was the Patrons Pick performance, he just couldn't help hugging Shrimp. And who could blame him? Shrimp is such a delightful, lovable character. They're the emotional or the spiritual center of the piece. But as much as the relationship between Fingers and Shrimp is, I like Fingers too, but Fingers is very abrasive. But yeah, everything about Shrimp is just so perfect. And it's what's interesting. We find out later on in the plot that Shrimp has been subject to some sort of violent animal testing. You might, keen-eyed viewers might notice early on that they have this sort of numbered tag attached to their ankle. Which
like
does
Rocket Raccoon.
Yeah, I guess kind of like, yes, a good example. That does get addressed more explicitly later on. There's this weird dinging noise that shows up early on that we don't know what it means. And then we kind of find out that it was probably part of some sort of Skinner box experiment that to get a specific treat.
Oh, and like a Pavlovian experiment.
Yeah, more Skinner than Pavlov. Get your psychology right. But yeah, it's what I think is interesting about this is like the closest thing to a critique I could possibly muster of this otherwise pretty damn great show. Is I wonder. I'm not even saying this is a problem. It's just something I think about. Like, why is Shrimp the one who's been through these experiments, right, the one who's so much more trusting of humans? I almost feel like it should be reversed, that Fingers, the jaded one, should be the one who has this backstory of experimentation, which explains why they're the one who's so on edge, and Shrimp, who's maybe more naive and hasn't had these kinds of experience, should be the easily dopey, forgiving one. And then maybe learning this about Fingers' backstory would illuminate why they are the way they are. Whereas that almost feels like a missed opportunity. I feel like Fingers kind of has, maybe the reasoning is that Fingers has enough backstory built in already that it was, let's give Shrimp something else too. But I don't know if it necessarily, when I learned that about Shrimp, I had more questions than answers, whereas I feel like it's the kind of thing that's supposed to provide answers. But yeah, this is just, again, I could just keep naming fun things about this show. I'll name one more. There's one moment.
Name one more.
When Shrimp is having a bit of a tantrum of sorts, and Fingers takes the garbage can and basically puts it over their head and turns to the audience, who's very much not having this because we all love Shrimp, remember? But then Fingers turns to the audience and says, "Moms in the audience, you get it." This is how you tend to the kid having, like, again, I could just keep going on and on. I love the show so much. I'm so glad everybody recommended it to me and that I did get to see it. I'm glad they got patrons pick. Very well earned. They are touring to many other fringes. I think they're currently, as we speak, in Winnipeg right now, and I believe they're from Edmonton or possibly Calgary originally. So yes, if you are in one of these cities where this is playing, check this out. This show is so good. And yeah, it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll make you feel things, it'll make you rethink your relationship to rats.
You'll want to hug a rat.
It'll make you want to hug a rat. It's so good.
Love that. Okay, well, next one is another one you and I both saw, and one that you recommended to me, which is The Kid Was a Spy, which is gem rolls and big word performance poetry. Mm-hmm. And this was one where Ryan, as you said, this was not in the festival program originally. It was a last minute sub for another show that unfortunately couldn't make it. And I have my program here too. Where is it here? There we go. Got our programs. And so the wonderful Joe Roll, Gem Roll. Yeah, so sorry. So the wonderful Gem Roll was out on the Saturday promoting his show, giving out pamphlets to people. And so Ryan said, "I got this pamphlet. Did you get this pamphlet?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I saw a similar show of his a few years ago. If you have a chance, go see it." So I had an opening spot on Sunday and was able to go see it. So yeah, but Ryan, tell us, what is the show about?
Yeah, so Gem Rolls is just such an interesting figure. Also, okay, before I get too far into it, I'll say, so as I mentioned in the previous episode, I reviewed a handful of shows for Intermission Magazine as well, in addition to everything we're doing here on the Cup, and this was one of the ones I covered there, so a lot of my thoughts already live there. I'll try to not redundantly cover all the same points that I already made there, but yeah, this is one of many, unlike part one where I hadn't written anything for them yet, but knew I was going to. Now, when we're recording part two, I've already written all of that. So yeah, Gem Rolls is this kind of, he's considered a fringe veteran legend. This is his 20th tour, the way it's being marketed. He's been doing this particular show. I think he already did it in Ottawa. And now
he did. This was his 10th performance of this particular piece.
Okay, yeah. He is just one of the most dynamic performers I think I've ever seen, or certainly up there, that he just writes these interesting solo performances. A lot of them are about forgotten historical figures associated with the history of atomic weaponry. And, a lot of us have Oppenheimer fever right now, but Oppenheimer was already treated like a god, a destroyer of worlds. So I think these shows come as a welcome antidote to that deification of here's someone you maybe haven't heard of, but is also very instrumental in that history.
Yeah.
And this one in particular is about Ted Hall, who at age 18 was already involved in the Manhattan... 18, 19, perhaps. I don't know. The title, this is something I thought was a little strange. The title calls him a kid. The kid was a spy, but I feel like his youth was never that important to the story. I feel like there's maybe, I don't know if that line comes from a quote from something, but it's interesting. That's the thing he wants to emphasize in the title. But well,
it's a good catchy title.
Yeah. So, but at an age under 20, let's say, he was already involved with the Manhattan Project. He was already attending Harvard, and he had communist sympathies himself. And in 1940,
more than just sympathies.
Well, he was in 1944. He engaged in espionage and leaked American nuclear secrets to the Soviets. So
after several attempts.
Yes. So this is what this show essentially is. It's providing everything you need to know about this person who you've probably never heard of before, understanding the context of his decisions, his life, the espionage that he was involved in, the way that followed him throughout the rest of his life, in order to build toward a very interesting moment of theater in which we, the audience, are invited to vote on whether or not we think his actions were justified, whether or not he behaved rightly or wrongly. And what is so lovable about Jem Rolls, in addition to everything else, is that he presents this in the context of such a non-judgmental way of putting history on trial, that he is just motivated by pure curiosity and fascination of, I just want to know, now that I've told you the facts as I understand them, as much as I could find, this meticulously researched this piece, and I've just spent an hour making this decision very complicated for you, making it as complicated as possible. What do you think? And he just lets us vote, and then he's just like a kid in a candy shop processing the results he gets from these votes, and tells us, at least in my show, how every show has had such a different result. And he's just having a fun time presenting history, seeing how we react to it. And, Ted Hall is dead. There's no, he's not going to face any kind of real life tribunal, more so than what he already did in his interrogations on this. So there's no legal framework in which he can be tried now, but it's a litmus test for our own sense of morality.
Public opinion,
but it's not even public opinion, because it's not like we're all going to go to Twitter now and cancel Ted Hall. It's just this is a thought experiment in testing your own morality and what you think, and how telling a good story that isn't framed in an adversarial courtroom framework can give us more nuance to understanding the depths and recesses of human decision making better than something that's trying to make a case one way or the other. And I'm curious, with your audience, did you vote in favor of Ted or against Ted?
No, I voted against him, and so did our audience. Our audience this is only the fourth time he's had it where the audience was against Ted at the end of the show.
Okay, mine was overwhelmingly for him. And this is what's so cool about it. He tells the same story. It's not like,
because I had an older audience. My audience was much older.
They remember more of the nuclear paranoia that he kind of indirectly put them through. So, that's understandable. Yeah, no, my audience, there were some people who voted against him, but it was overwhelmingly majority was. And it's presented not as the hero is someone who did a bad thing and became a destroyer of worlds, but as a lot of this framing presents him, he's a balancer of scales prior to his espionage.
Well, that's how he viewed himself.
Yeah. No, but it is a reasonable way of whether or not we're actually judging the result of his actions versus the intent of his actions. And there's a lot of just different ways we can approach this. But it's just, this is such again, Jem's performances are so well performed. This one is directed by Christine Ranzinger, but they're completely written and directed by Jem. And he has just such a unique way of performing. I would have loved to have this man as a high school history teacher. I don't know if performing is his full-time job, or if he clearly has been doing this for a long time, but he just really, history comes alive, feels like a cliche, but the way he cascades across the stage, flailing his arms, doing this weird rhythmic poetry performance that everything
Yeah.
has a very specific inflection. I just love seeing him from here on out. Like, I'm never missing an opportunity to see him. I'm so glad that he got included in this year's Fringe. And yeah, like, he just really has a way of taking these bizarre chapters of history and really making them pop. So any other kind of thoughts you have, or you want to
Oh, I
share?
have so many thoughts on this.
Yeah, please.
This was one I'm so glad, just like how you got snuck in Rat Academy into yours. I was so glad I was able to get this piece in, because I'm a lover of history. Like,
I know you are.
As you know, Ryan, I'm a big lover of all history, particularly the Kennedys, but that's just as the point.
Were there Kennedys in this? I don't remember them getting
mentioned. This guy on the back, he was part of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was the war hawk who wanted to bomb Cuba. So Kennedy did not like him after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He was on the outs with Kennedy. Anyway. So, but this piece, I came away from this piece feeling less like it was a theatrical show and more like a really well done, dynamic history lecture that I would have absolutely paid money to go see anytime. I follow Rachel Maddow, who does these great history podcasts where she, once again, takes these people from history who, have kind of been forgotten and reignites them and reexamines them and how do they tie into our world today. Like, she's got this one right now all about Lester Holt, who was the senator from Utah who commits suicide while in office. And he goes, and the reason was because Joe McCarthy was blackmailing about his son. And so, but then the podcast gets into Joe McCarthy and how he fell to Nazism, and he was promoting Nazi propaganda and how that tied into his 1950s Cold War communist scare type thing and how that ties into the Republican Party today. Anyway, so he's very similar to how she tells her podcasts. So I came out of this going, I would love just to have a podcast. He can take months off where he writes his scripts and does his research and then splits them into like two-part podcast series. But he could make a killing off this. Because I would totally listen just to him speak about these topics. I will say there was a very interesting thing where the ladies ahead of me who were coming out, they said, I wish he had projections so we could see the faces of these people to help us square away. Yes, once again, but the lights are down, the lights are on him. You don't really, you don't want to be sitting there the whole time, bobbing your head up and down, trying to remember who it is, because he's talking at a really good pace. Once again, it's almost like slam poetry where he's got a pace, he is moving. So having some type of projection to help illustrate what he's talking about, I think I agree, especially in these stories, because he acknowledges he's not going to do the Hollywood thing about history where you combine certain people who may have smaller roles, but you kind of can get them all into one role for the sake of a story, kind of like Matt Damon in Oppenheimer, where he took on several different general roles that Oppenheimer dealt with, and he made them into one role. So here he's like, no, we're going to go through everybody. Yeah. But that now means you got to remember who's who. And when you're talking so fast, sometimes you can kind of lose a bit of what's happening. And so I came up not thinking about it until the lady said it in front of me, but I'm like, I can see where people are coming from with that, where if you're trying to square who's who in history and you're trying to remember, okay, that person did this and that, because sometimes they would leave the story for a bit and then would come back later on in the story. So you're right, that person again. Okay, so what did they do before? So having a visual aid would just help square away some of it, because it's not like you need a lot. I mean, once again, the stage manager's up in the up in the booth, and they have maybe 3 cues in the entire show because the lights don't really change. They stay pretty much flat during the show, and it's just Jem doing this wonderful lecture theatrical slam poetry performance. So you could add in some cues for the stage manager to be able to cue some images to help remind people or help illustrate some of the points that are happening in this story, just to really go further with this and make it even more lively on stage for people who maybe just can't keep all the names squared away. Because you and I are used to, because I listen to long form podcasts. You lecture and are part of the lecture scene. There are people who are like my parents, or people who watch, try and watch Game of Thrones and go, there's too many characters, I can't remember who's who and who's related to who or what. And then that turns them off. And that's what sometimes is going to happen with a history class or a history lecture is there's too many people, there's too many characters or too many figures to remember who does what and how that plays into where. So I think having some type of visual aid would maybe help. But overall, it's such a great piece. Once again, it's fascinating to hear about these forgotten history figures. Like I called my dad afterwards because he's read all these wartime Oppenheimer Manhattan Project stories. And so I said, "Did you know about Taylor?" He goes, he's briefly mentioned in the books he's read about him. He's not featured in that way. But I said, well, I mean, if you were able to get down here, which he wasn't able to, but I said, if we had another weekend to go see a show, I would have taken him to see this one because he would have enjoyed it. But I guarantee he also would have felt a bit, because he also is losing his hearing, like he wears a hearing aid, where it's like, yeah, like he maybe would have struggled at times to remember who's who in the story that he's telling.
Yeah.
So I think having some visuals maybe would have helped a bit. But Jem is just so dynamic as a performer that, like, you are watching him a lot, but I do agree with some audience members who maybe would have felt maybe having a hard time sometimes connecting with the story just because they can't remember everybody's part in it. So I don't know. That's my
I think it's fair. I don't really personally feel that way, but I wouldn't fault others if they do. I know Glenn Sumit said something similar in his review for Parton and Pearl. Part of me just loves how stripped down these shows are, that I feel like I don't want to say it would cheapen it to have like spectacle visuals, but I feel like it could become a slippery slope of, oh, well, now that you have the faces on the screen, why don't you do other kind of flashy things? And I think similar to how the vote at the end sort of brings us into this Athenian democracy ethos of this is what the theatrical event is for. I kind of love just how analog everything is, that it is just one man with the rhythmic tones of his voice presenting this piece. I don't know. Like, I think something would be lost, even if it might therefore make it easier to follow some of the narrative. I appreciated having the program that had these faces.
I had no problem reading it myself.
Yeah.
But I saw a lot of people who were just so focused on him that they weren't taking time. Because also, you don't want to be rude. Where like, you're watching this guy bare his soul on stage telling this very good story. And you don't want to be sitting there like,
yeah, and like personally, I glanced down at it a couple times, but it's not like I was intently looking at it to triangulate these people. I guess the previous show of his that I saw, A Walk in the Snow, I think it was called, that one, and we reviewed that in our 2022 Fringe, that one did something a little different than this one. Where he kind of created, as I described at the time, as like this hieroglyphic language.
Right, and that's what I was thinking it was going to be like.
Yeah, like every time he said Niels Bohr, he did this like pipe motion, Niels Bohr. And like I even said at the time with that one, that like if you watched the first half as is and then put it on mute for the second half, you could follow who you're hearing about. He had like a couple things like that in this one. The character of Saville Savvy Sachs, who had deformed hands that flailed about, possibly had some kind of Tourette's maybe. He did like some kind of flailing motion every time that character was mentioned. And the character Lana Cohen, who, oh dearie me, he kept doing that sort of the way that she pretended to be more ditzy than she was so she could pull off her spycraft. Maybe if we had more of those things, then it could at least, Lana Cohen, who is that, dearie me? Oh yes, that's who it is. So if we had one of those for every character, like he's done in previous shows, that would have supplemented where the types of visuals you're describing were absent. But I don't fault it. I thought it was fantastic, but a point taken about how maybe not everyone would be able to follow it in the same way.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, once again, Jem, please do a podcast. I would absolutely listen to your podcast, and I'm sure you get quite a few sponsors for it because, the research he does, just incredible. So, a very good piece, a very well done piece, and I'm so glad he came up to me and explained his show and got me on board, and that I was able to see it on the Sunday because it was very, very well done. So, yes, agreed. All right, let's get into the next piece though, Ryan, because next one is one that you only saw, which is Gulp by Lady Luck Company.
Okay, this one was a lot, and I loved it. I'm putting those cards on the table now that I thought this show is fantastic, but it took me a while to get a handle on this show. It's another one that I reviewed for Intermission, and because I reviewed it there and fought against all my better judgment to not do spoilers in that review, I think I have to spoil this one here. I do hope this show gets an afterlife. I'm not going to.
Do we want the Fringe button coming up on screen for?
Honestly, no. It's just know that this show is great. I just think it's post Fringe. If this ever gets an afterlife and you're watching this in anticipation of seeing this show, just skip to the next segment and just run out and see this because it's really good. But so this is a show. It's a solo performance. It's written and performed by Frosina Pejon. Apologies again, everybody, for my horrible pronunciations. That's directed by William Dow, who I'm always a big fan of his work. And it also features pre-recorded vocal performances by Bryn Bonney and Dmitry Chepovensky. And yeah, it's okay. So this is a piece where presented with a young woman on stage. She's sitting in a chair, and there's two whiteboards on each side of her, and each one has a tape recorder or like answering machine attached to it. And she's essentially monologuing to us, the audience, the story of how her friend died 3 months ago. And we're told very early on that not only did the friend die, but I think I killed her. So, okay, you have our attention. And let's
it's like
find
Amadeus
out.
opening with Salieri.
Kind
I
of,
killed
yeah.
Mozart.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting connection that I hadn't considered, but yeah, there's some interesting ways that's also an interesting connection, but no time for that. But yeah, so we're told that the friend is dead, and one of these two answering machines that we have next to her is erratically playing old voicemails from this friend. It seems to be on the fritz, and they just play randomly. There's no rhyme or reason to when one happens. And this is Bryn Bonney plays this unnamed friend who gives an astonishing vocal performance. She exhibits so much emotional range without ever setting foot on stage. And we kind of learn about this bizarre codependent friendship between these two people, and knowing that the friend is dead and our main character thinks she's responsible, it's really kind of every time we hear something, we're sort of wondering like, okay, I'm trying to piece together what's happening here. Psychological thriller kind of feels like the term or genre designation that one is likely to use for this. But meanwhile, we're also hearing about how our protagonist has been dealing with the aftermath of this by going to see a therapist named Dr. Champion. And Dr. Champion doesn't seem like a particularly conventional therapist. And he very early on decides that he wants to have his sessions outside of his office at irregular hours. He wants to see her in these various locations. He seems a little handsy in certain ways. He kind of fiddles with her scarf in a bit of an intimate way. And as much as we, the audience, feel like this is highly unethical and this therapist should not be behaving this way, our protagonist is loving the attention and is very clearly becoming infatuated with this therapist and wants to please him and maybe wants to tell him the things he wants to hear, as she's slowly withholding information from both him and us about what exactly happened between her and her friend. Okay, I have to spoil this show. I was a good boy and I didn't spoil it in my intermission piece. We find out very close to the end of the show. She turns and writes on one of the whiteboards, which she hasn't used to write the whole time. She's alive. That the friend we're told is dead at the outset is in fact not dead. And how I described it in my intermission piece is I wanted to stand up and scream, you can't just do that, right? But I'm so impressed that they did, because okay, I instantly wanted to rewatch the whole show with knowing this and seeing how it kind of plays. And part of me, I think this isn't quite like a Shyamalanian Sixth Sense sort of twist where once you learn this, it all clicks into place. We're basically told that she's been lying to us and her therapist the whole time. I do think there's a lot of things that would get recontextualized by learning this information once we find it out, especially just rewatching the show, knowing that these are lies, untruths. But she is pretty explicit in saying this. This isn't some sort of that the friend died. It's not like a kind of, retracing the script after the fact, you realize that she never quite said it. But it's fascinating. And it kind of does feel like it's done so matter-of-factly in a blindsiding way that it completely lacks the sort of narrative pyrotechnics you'd expect from a twist like this. And that made it all the more impactful, at least in my opinion. And like when I was writing my intermission piece on this, I really had to, it's tough responding to this. I had such a hard time getting a handle on how to write about this piece in a non-spoilery way, because I didn't want to say things that were not true about the situation once we find out what's really going on at the end. But I also didn't want to phrase things in a way that give up the twist. So I did things in here where I say that she tells the audience that her friend died, not that her friend, or not saying that her friend died. And I thought I'm patting myself on the back for this, that I described the friend, especially when I'm talking about Bryn Bonnie's performance. I said that it's her departed friend, which is technically true because the friend moves to Vegas. So she's departed in the sense of moving, but not in the deceased sense. So, I could write a psychological thriller that plays fast and loose with what we know and whether or not things are true or untrue. But yeah, I think this is just, it's such a jarring twist that, it really does, watching it, you feel like the rug is pulled completely out from under you because you think you're watching one thing, but it turns out that this is also a manifestation of the complicated friendship between our protagonist and her friend. And more than anything, she's telling us the story of how she's lying to her therapist because she thinks that she can continue to get his attention by continuing to deceive him. And as problematic as his attention is, she is very much desiring it. And that there is this element of codependence that exists in both of these relationships. This piece is, it has such an amazing use of a spotlight. The spotlight is a character on its own, similar to the frame of reference that I bring to mind is Beckett's play titled Play, where the three urns are coaxed out of their silence with a spotlight that it feels like it's a character on its own. But after, one of the final images is the spotlight just climbing across the walls and zoomed in on her at various points. It really makes it feel like an interrogation, even though we have no sense of who, if anything, is actually controlling it. The lighting designer's name is Matthew Ivanoff. Excellent job there. The sound design is done by Matt Lalonde, in addition to making all of these very interesting voicemail messages. There's this kind of hard breathing sound that's sort of playing at a low hum throughout the entire piece. At first, I wasn't sure if it was just that there was someone really breathing heavily in the audience, but over the course of it, it was so consistent that I'm pretty sure it was part of the sound design in particular. I was talking to Will Dow, the director, before the show, and he told me that he's been getting all the humble brag a bit, but all the reviews have been so positive and overwhelmingly excited about the show that he kind of wishes that somebody would voice a critique. And
Ryan, fire away.
Well, after I was sitting right behind him during the show, and I went to him after, you want me to critique that? This show is amazing. I think it's fantastic. And in a 300 words count piece for intermission, I'm I'm not wasting any time critiquing this. It's too good. There's too many things I want to praise. But if we have a little time here, I scrounged through the recesses of my brain to try to think of, okay, what can I say? What could still use some work in this? I came up with three quick things. None of them are deal breakers. First off, the character we are told in the program, I don't believe this was ever said in the show, but the character's name is Sunday. I don't recall that ever being said in the text of the play itself. I think it's in the program, and maybe I missed it because it's such an unusual proper name that maybe it was said, but I didn't register that it was the character being named in those moments because it just doesn't sound like a name. But after I submitted my review, I read everyone else's review, and everyone's just so matter-of-factly saying the character is Sunday, who is in this situation. And I'm I kind of wish that it was made more, if you want this to be the character's name, that it was made more clear that that's the character's name in the piece. Because it's a strange name that almost beckons to have a story told about it. Why is this my name? Part of me feels similar to Stiff and Sons, which has its Wednesday Addams-esque character. I feel like this must be some kind of a hat tip to Wednesday Addams, which is a similar vibe that comes off from our protagonist here. But it also, I can't shake the feeling that I kind of like Sunday as a name because it acknowledges its belatedness to Wednesday Addams in that way. But I kind of just wish, if this is the character's name, was made clearer. You shouldn't have to read a program note to find out the name of the character if that's going to be treated as something important.
Right.
Quick critique number 2. Speaking of why things are called, why is it called Gulp is a question I have about this piece, because that also never becomes apparent in the piece. In my intermission review, I wrote a funny opening lead about how the truth could be a hard pill to swallow, thinking that would be an apparent callback to the title of the piece, Gulp, Swallow, haha. But my editor kind of said, but I don't get the joke here. Could you at least sort of spell it out, maybe kind of comment on why the show is called Gulp? And I struggled to think of why is the show called Gulp. So maybe that's something else that could have been finagled a little bit. And last one, because Will, you said you wanted critiques. Here's one. who are we, the audience, in this piece? At first, I thought we were kind of fly on the wall in her therapist's office, but then she keeps referring to the therapist in the third person. He doesn't seem to be present on here. He's also a voice on the tape recorder, so I have no sense of maybe who we are we inside her brain, maybe fleshing out some version of our relationship to her and why we are the people she's telling this to could be a way to flesh out this piece and maybe give us more of a trusting relationship that will add to the element of broken trust that we get into the final twist ending. But overall, those are gripes that have been specifically cataloged because the director solicited them. I thought the show was great. Somebody snatch this up and get it in your season for next year.
Love it. Mervish, Shaw, Stratford.
I feel like those are probably like too big a house for this very intimate solo piece, but theater.
Well, there's smaller spaces. I mean, studio theater at Stratford could do
even
it.
So. Like this doesn't feel like it. This doesn't feel like it belongs in any of those houses, but Pass Marai Factory, somebody house this. Like this belongs in like a Tarragon season for sure.
Okay, I got you.
Maybe Crows. I don't know.
Oh, Crows be good. That'd be good. I could see that.
Cool.
From what you described. Excellent. Okay. Great. Well, next up, we have a show that you and I both saw as well. One that we got very different experiences on because of some functioning AC, which is Dead Right by Dead Right Productions. And it was directed by Brian Nasumok and was written by Kate Barris and David Stravitsky. Stratsky. So, yeah. So, I mean, the wonderful marketing team reached out to us on this show and just said, hey, heads up, you would have seen two very different shows because unfortunately Alumni was having some AC problems. And so the heat, the night I saw it, was affecting both the audience and the cast. So it kind of warped the ending a bit. And even gave one of the cast members, I believe, heat stroke as well. So there was struggles there. But you saw it on a night where the AC was working well. So Ryan, I'll let you go first in this case.
Okay. So this is one, we talked about this a bit with Stiff and Sons about dark comedies in particular. This is one that I think presents itself as being a dark comedy, but I think kind of veers in tone closer to just like an intimate family drama with some funny moments. But it's not so much because
more of a dramedy than a comedy.
Yeah, very dramedy. Yeah, so the basic setup is that we have, I would say our protagonist is Susanna, played by Christy Woods. And she's recently quit her job and wants to pursue a playwriting career. She has an interesting feminist masterpiece play that she has lurking inside her that she just has to get out of her system.
I object.
Or I object. Yeah, but yes, very funny. And so she's married to Michael, played by Chris Gibbs. And he is a psychologist who has... patients who are dealing with things like OCD that call him
He also
too
loves
often.
to talk about himself.
Yes, he is a bit of a narcissist, very much suck the oxygen out of the room kind of guy. And so there are sort of central figures, but the plot in motion is put forward by Helena, who is Susanna's mom, played by Janelle Hutchinson, and her fairly recent second husband, Bud, played by Alan Price. So Helena has been sick for some time, and she has decided that she would like to do, I don't even know if they specifically refer to it as medically assisted suicide.
Yeah.
Also,
but that's what it is.
Content warning. She has decided she wants to end her own life, and she has
colon cancer.
Yeah, so she doesn't have a lot of quality of life with her medical situation, has decided she just wants to end things, and she has entered into what they refer to explicitly as a suicide pact with her husband, Bud, that he, in theory, does not want to live without her, and therefore, if she's going to die, he wants to die too. And the main thrust of the plot is that Susanna is devastated by this news. She thinks that there's a lot still to live for, a lot more to try, and it's about the mother-daughter relationship of trying to convince her mother to not go through with this thing she's already decided to do. Yeah, how's that for a plot description?
That's it. I mean, there is the one thing about the dog at the end, which we'll get to.
Okay, you have thoughts about the dog.
We'll get to the dog.
Okay, so this is one that I really wanted to love, and unfortunately, I feel like it didn't quite get there for me. I know this is not a fair standard to hold it to, but to me, what initially sparked my enthusiasm for this piece is that it felt like it was supposed to be, or going to be, a spiritual successor to a play that you and I both saw last year at Fringe, Dead End,
Right.
which it featured a lot of the same creative team. Brian Nasamok also directed it. Chris Gibbs was also among the cast.
Yeah.
And yeah, in general, I was told by Kate Barris, one of the two playwrights, in my email exchange with her, that this isn't certainly not a sequel, maybe not even a spiritual successor, and that's fine, which is why I don't think it's fair to make this comparison.
Yeah.
But that one was an off-the-walls farce where you never knew what was going to happen from one minute to the next. And this one is a much more grounded, light dramedy, dark comedy, whichever one of those frameworks you think is more appropriate. So yeah, right off the bat, I think it kind of suffers by comparison, even if it's not a comparison that it's trying to draw. But there's another comparison that I think it also suffers is probably the wrong word for this, but that maybe didn't help, is that very recently I saw another play with almost an identical premise. And that was Geordie Mann's play In 7 Days, which recently played at the Harold Green Jewish Theatre. I think it's a touring production that was previously at the Grand in London. But that is almost an identical premise of sick, aging parent wants to end their life medically, and their adult daughter has to come to terms with and tries to talk them out of it. And truth be told, I didn't love that play either. And a big part of my critique with that one is that I felt like it was trying too hard to be funny, which was doing a bit of an undercutting of a play that was otherwise doing a fine job of being very poignant. And therefore, it doesn't really help that this show is also trying very hard to be funny and lacking a lot of the poignancy that even that still not great play also sort of brought, that I felt was the saving grace of that piece. In this piece, in the absence of very sharp humor and very meaningful emotional dynamics, I felt really didn't quite, it was unclear what we're supposed to be getting from this. If it's like, I found it as a bit very low energy. The convoluted plot machinations didn't really result into anything I would call a farce or belonging within the generic world or atmosphere of a farce. It goes on a bit too long. I think it clocks in at like 85 minutes. Maybe if you clipped out a lot of stuff and brought it down to a tight hour, it would have moved a lot faster. And it's a shame because I really wanted to like this. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going for it. But it's also kind of just a bit all over the map. The character of Bud almost feels like you could cut him out entirely. He presents a plot complication when he reveals that he doesn't want to go through with the suicide pact. But that is resolved very easily. He's like, okay, so just don't kill yourself. And he decides that, and it's fine. But it doesn't have any meaningful impact on Helena's decision to whether or not she's going to go through with it. So yeah, it's Chris Gibbs' character, Michael. He's bringing a lot of the, what I'll call the comedy in this, but I don't think, like, he also just feels very superfluous. Like this whole play, like there's a whole recurring motif in here about how Susanna is Michael's second wife, and his ex-wife worked at a library, and he was cheating on her with Susanna, but taking her on dates to the library that his wife worked at, which is just like, okay, so this guy's a big dumb dummy. But they brought it up so many times that I kept expecting that to maybe tie into the main plot line, and it just never really felt like it was going anywhere. And again, there's just so many things that I feel like you could cut, but there was also too many of those things that it sort of becomes a bit of a house of cards. Like, what do you take out that's actually structural or important to it? And what is actually necessary to keep? And so sorry, I feel like I'm being very down on this one. And I saw the performance where things actually went very smoothly. I know you saw the one where things did not. Anything you want to kind of chime in?
I mean, so once again, this piece had a very interesting like byline on it where also my mother and I have had similar conversations where, she went through seeing my grandmother be sick with ovarian cancer and then go into hospice and languish there for 17 days. And she goes, I don't want to go through that. So, if I get a terminal illness, I'm pulling my plug on my own. Like, I'm making my own choices here. And she goes, yeah, Mac, I'm not putting you in charge because you'll hang on to me till the very end of time and won't let me go. And my sisters are like, yeah, no, Mom, don't worry. We'll pull the plug for you. Like, Mac won't do it, but we will. And, I came back from this play. My sister and I had a very interesting debate about this topic. So I do think this play sparked some very good moral, ethical conversations about, medically assisted suicide. But I will say, I think, and once again, I don't know because the heat was major, but the pacing felt a bit off that night. But the cast had good chemistry. Like, you felt the interconnectedness between these four, that it felt like they've lived lives together. where it's like Bud and Helena. They were such a cute old couple. Like they were kind of like the couple from Up in a way. Like I love Bud as a character. He was just such a.
I loved him too. I just wish he had more to do in this play.
Right.
I guess.
Yes.
He felt superfluous, which is unfortunate because I agree. He is likable. I think everyone is likable. The cast are all really good. Christy Woods as Susanna is definitely a standout. Like I think she did an excellent job, and as the protagonist, she really does anchor the whole thing. Yeah. Like I don't want to say this is just like I know I kind of front-loaded a lot of the critique, but there are good things like that. I will say they did get the patrons pick for alumni, and what I attended was a sold-out show. Now, granted, I think
same here. Like our show was sold out as well.
Now, the majority of the audience, at least when I saw it, was definitely over 60 years of age.
Mine too.
And so, but this show, they're clearly doing something right.
Group. Yeah.
Yeah, they're clearly doing something right in finding their target audience, marketing to them specifically. And, I don't want to say that therefore, I didn't love it and they shouldn't either, but I think there is sort of a generational sensibility here that I think is maybe...
We're not there yet, Ryan.
We're not there yet. And I think it's interesting what you're saying about how the way it resonated with you in your own personal family situation. And I think you and I are very much living in the Susanna demographic generation of we're the ones who have to grapple with it from that perspective. And maybe audiences who relate to Helena or Bud specifically get something very different from this show. Again, I feel like I was maybe harsh on it. I didn't love it, but I do think there's a lot going for it. Yeah, cut it down to an hour and then find what the beating heart of it really is, and then I think
exactly. Like I would trim a bit. Like it did drag on a bit after because there's the big confrontation scene with the ladder, where basically Helena's I think hang herself on the ladder, if I remember correctly. There's something going on there with the ladder, and they fight over the ladder. They leave, and then you come back on, and somebody has died in this.
Yes, which we're supposed to assume is Helena. I think.
Yes, which I did too until. You find out, oh no, spoiler alert, it's the dog.
Yes, the dog is perished.
We didn't really get much with the dog.
There was enough references to the dog that it's not like that felt like it came out of nowhere. I think they dragged out the reveal just long enough that I suspected that we're going to find out it's not Helena. Right. I didn't necessarily instantly connect it's going to be the dog. I thought maybe, no, actually we found out early on, they mentioned that Bud was at the funeral. So the funeral for the dog. So, but like that, it was presented in a way where you're like, okay, we're going to find out something unexpected here, but it only can be so unexpected if you're not expecting it, but it was presented in a way where I still expected it. I don't know. It just, there wasn't really like a tone of dread that maybe would have sold that moment. And then we could get a sigh of relief when we find out that it's not the case.
Like me, but I mean, Bud should have been alone on stage for a bit before Helena comes back on. So you really, because they are talking about where it's like, I didn't know so many people would attend and things like that. Yeah. So it's like, it's very possible it could have been Helena.
Yes. Well, we're supposed to think it is. But it just goes on just a bit too long without them saying that explicitly, that you can sense a twist is in store. Right. And then it sort of doesn't quite feel like a twist when we finally get the revelation because you've been anticipating it. At least I was.
Yeah. I mean, overall, like the moral and ethical conversations that this stimulates were great. And I mean, you're right. My audience was on the older end. But they were enjoying the show, so they have found a good market. And I would say if they just tighten the show up a bit, then I think they could definitely keep this piece going because this is going to be a bigger conversation. My mom just turned 60. She's part of that baby boomer or like second generation baby boomer because they're born in the 60s. But it's like, like my parents are getting to that age where like we are going to be facing this with our own parents in the not too distant future. So I do think this play does have something to say. I just think once again, it's a little bit muddled right now, but the bones are there. I just think once again, refine it a bit more, tighten it up a bit. And, I think that will absolutely help this piece get to the next level it can get to for sure.
Fair.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Next piece is one that only you saw, Ryan, which is Gringas by Firstborn Theater Company. So give it to us, Ryan.
Okay, so this is written by Mercedes Aziza Clooney. It is directed by Zoe Martin. It stars a 7-person cast of all Latina, female-presenting folks. So this one's really interesting. So this was another one that wasn't on my initial list, but kept hearing so much buzz about it that it was a late addition for me. And it did also get Patron's Pick for Aki Studio. I saw it on the last day, but for a pre-scheduled performance, not the Patron's Pick performance. But it had already been announced as Patron's Pick, so there was clearly so much buzz and energy surrounding it. So the title, Gringas, refers to, we are told what this term means within the play itself. And we're told very clearly that it's not a slur, that it is a neutral term that refers to somebody who is not Hispanic. But it is also sometimes used in a derogatory sense to refer to a Hispanic woman who has lost touch with her culture and therefore become whitewashed so that she might as well be a gringa, even though she herself comes from that heritage. So with that setup, we are presented with these 7 young ladies who are sent to a camp in Muskoka by their mothers because they have lost the connection to their heritage, their culture, and specifically their language, because this is a Spanish immersion camp where in the public spaces of the camp, they have to speak Spanish. So because all of them have lost a lot of their language proficiency, being assimilated into contemporary Canadian culture, this is, their parents want them to reconnect with those roots through speaking the language itself. So that's our basic setup.
Okay.
And we're told also very early on, and this is a line that is said more than once, is that we weren't friends at first. So that tells us 2 things, that this is basically unlikely personalities maybe clashing in the space where none of them really want to be there. But the at first also tells us that they will be unlikely friends by the end of this, and that everything's going to go along and kind of go in a friendship building direction here. So this structurally, I think this piece is really interesting because we're presented. I kind of want to compare it a little bit to Come From Away, but also to Les Belles Sœurs, if these very Canadian frames of reference are helpful here. And I think dramaturgically, it's doing something interesting with chorality, that we have multiple sequences where all 7 of them are kind of speaking either together or monologues that are chopped up for each of them getting a little piece of. So it has like a Greek chorus type feel to it. But I also feel like dramaturgically, it's interesting how we get so much of that at the beginning of the show or in the first half of the show. But then as it goes on, we get a lot more individual monologues from the characters themselves, where they kind of take a moment to explain, this is my deal, this is where I'm coming from, the things that I'm personally grappling with. And I kind of almost feel like that's, to me, that seems like the reverse of how you'd expect a show like this to go. If they start off as individuals but become friends by the end, you'd think it would start with the monologues and then build towards a synergy where they're all speaking together, finishing each other's sentences, presenting themselves as a unit. That's why I kind of compare it to Come From Away, in that there is no single protagonist. The community is the protagonist, and the active building community is the engine of the entire piece. Whereas this almost feels like it starts with them as community and then they get fractured as it goes on, which seems like it's the opposite of what's actually happening in the plot. And why I also compare it to Les Belles Sœurs is because it does have that vibe of the individual spotlights where the plot kind of pauses and they sort of tell you what's going on in their heads in the way that piece works, that it almost feels like it's trying to blend those 2 things. And I'm not even saying this is a problem, that it feels like the inverse of how it almost is supposed to go. And there might be good reason for why it is structured this way. But I just thought that was curious. That's kind of how engaging with these interesting characters and all their dynamics, it seems strange that they became less of a community or a unit as it went on, even though the thrust of the plot, as I was understanding it, was that they were becoming closer friends and more of a community. And maybe there is more. Again, this is a piece that I think I talked to some people, certainly Latinx folks, who said that this piece really resonated with them. And I obviously, me being me, cannot feel like I tapped into that. There's a lot of things. Some of it is even bilingual, where whole passages are done in Spanish and not translated, just either keep up or just deal with the vibes of it. And I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that, I went in expecting this to be like the most amazing show, the way everyone's talking about it. And I thought it was really strong, really enjoyed it. It won several new play contests, or came in like 3rd place for the Toronto one, but won 1st place for another one. And I think it's very strong. There's a lot going for it, but it kind of ultimately becomes a bit of a vibes piece where we're presented with all these characters. Not all of them get what I would call satisfying or meaningful arcs. And it builds towards, I guess, spoilers here a little bit. There is a rapturous ending in which things do get set on fire. But I also think that it's unclear if that is a hopeful note to end on. And I'm not saying it has to be a hopeful note to end on, but to me, the ending felt very abrupt. And I was wondering, and it's fine to be unsure how you feel about something, but I struggle to think what it is that maybe we're supposed to take away from this and to just kind of live in a sense of destruction in that way. But part of me also feels like it's supposed to be like a purifying fire, which I just wonder what to make of it, I guess, in a lot of senses. Yeah, I do think there's a lot of really interesting stuff, the way it kind of weaves in things from Mexican culture and folklore. There's a whole sequence that really feels like ripped right out of a book of folklore. There's a lot of really great movement sequences. Movement director credit here is Blythe Russell. All 7 members of the cast, I think, were doing excellent jobs. Some of them feel like they get more meaningful arcs than others, like I said, which really fleshed them out. But yeah, there's a really cute romance plot between 2 of the characters that I thought was really well done. And yeah, overall, like, I think it's raising a lot of interesting questions. It's presenting a really interesting dynamic. I just maybe I would need to see it a second time. It's going to Hamilton Fringe right after this. So, and I don't know if there's a further tour beyond that. But I think there is an afterlife for the show, but I think it does, to my taste, sort of still need a little more development as strong as it is. I think a lot of those award accolades are built on a lot of the promise that this piece represents more so than its finality as a strong total product in its current state. But I do see where a lot of that buzz came from, and I think it is well earned, and I do hope to see another version of this that does kind of not even fix things, because I don't think there are problems that need to be fixed, but maybe iron out some wrinkles or really kind of touch on a beating heart. But also because it has touched so many people who I think do have more of a cultural connection to this piece, I don't necessarily want to come here and say I have the answers to what this piece needs. Maybe it is sort of perfect for that audience how it is. Right. And it's okay if this isn't a piece for me, even though I still did get a lot out of it.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's Gringas. It's one that I enjoyed a lot, but have more questions than answers, I guess.
All right. Yeah, I mean, there's always room for pieces to grow. And I think this one definitely sounds like it's got a really good, solid foundation that I hope grows on. I mean, definitely sounds like it's connected with the right audience. That's for sure. So awesome. All right, well, let's get to the next one, which is one I saw, and it is Get a Clue by Creative Music and Theater with Claire. And so this piece was my first show out of the gate at the Fringe this year, and it is marketed as a horror murder mystery comedy musical that's actually scary, but still pretty funny. And I will acknowledge right off the bat, this is a intermediate theater company in collaboration with this other company, Creative Music and Theater with Claire. So it is a youth production. The cast is young. And so I will give them that X factor behind them, because if they were working actors, like professional actors beyond schooling and everything else, and maybe I would view this piece differently. But as this is a younger crowd, I will absolutely give them a proper X factor behind it. Because I will say, this piece definitely was very interesting. Reading the notes by Claire was very enlightening to this piece, because this show lost 7/8 of its cast before it went to Fringe, because it took 2 years to get it into Fringe. By that time, majority of the cast who had started on this piece had grown up and grown out of the program. But they were the ones that originally came up with this idea. And so it was definitely a piece that felt like it was youth exploring topics that were interesting to them. Bullying, stereotype roles in high school, and then also the fascination with true crime, because that's a new thing these days. Where even Claire goes, I don't quite get why people are fascinated with true crime, but our class was, and this is what sparked their interest. So this is kind of like Scream meets I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's kind of the ways I would kind of describe this piece. It's a musical. And so, yeah, I mean, this piece, you could tell the youth kind of had a lot of say in how this piece was written, because it felt a bit buckshot as a show. It didn't quite have that, Knives Out cohesive murder mystery flow to it, that it all kind of pulls its strings together really well. So yeah, there were times where I went, I think I know where this murder mystery is going, but then they throw something in completely different and it didn't quite work in that way. But once again, this was youth. This is them. Like, I remember being in high school trying to do pieces, right? And Ryan, I'm sure you were there with me too, where it's like, we all want a death scene. We all want to be the murderer. We all want to, have our little soapbox moment of the show. So, yeah. But I will say the songs were really catchy and really fun. And so the songs were nice. They sang to tracks in this particular production. There were other musicals I saw this Fringe that had live orchestras, but this one was with tracks. And so the cast did the best they could with that. I mean, some of the cast, you could tell, were having some vocal issues. It was early on in the run as well. So I think they were still finding their footing where, there were some line drops, there was some blocking that was a little bit off, but the cast really did have nice chemistry together. And I will give a special shout out to, let me see here, do I have a proper cast list in the program? I do not. But the actress who played Barb, who was kind of like the Wednesday Addams-esque kind of...
How many Wednesday Addams were there in this Fringe?
The Wednesday Netflix show is big right now, Ryan. It's a thing. And so that actress, who unfortunately I didn't have their name, but they were lovely. They really had a lot of fun. There were a few other cast members who brought a lot of great energy to their roles, who just really embodied those high school stereotype of the nerd, the, always on going live on Instagram, social media influencer type. Like, there were quite a few of those moments there. So I will say, like, they did embody the stereotypes well, and they did feel kind of like that 90s slasher-esque show. I just would say they maybe need a bit more guidance in refining the plot a bit to really kind of make this piece work. Because it's not like it couldn't have been stronger. Like, it definitely could have been stronger if they just maybe said, okay, we get it. Y'all want a death scene. Y'all want to be the murderer, but, part of doing the show means, being cohesive and working at all the beats and making sure that we still have a very cohesive story at the end, So it was fun, though. I mean, the audience was having a fun time with it. There definitely were some good jokes in there. Even I had a good chuckle at. So was it a perfect piece? No, but this is a youth piece. You have to understand that the youth are learning, they're developing, they're growing. They're not going to be, a Stephen Sons who got it and have refined writing and creative skills that way, that can know how to do the story and bring all the pieces together. That takes time, that takes maturity. And so I appreciate Claire working with the youth and really inspiring them and getting them interested in the arts. And I hope these artists do well, because there are several of them who I think really do have a passion and have a drive for this piece that I think could really go places. So yeah, I would say solid foundations there. Definitely could use a bit more guidance and refining on getting that, but also understanding that them getting into Fringe was a very kind of last minute thing. Claire acknowledges that this was a very last minute piece to pull everything together. And then she goes, yeah, maybe doing a musical was a bit of a big, apple to bite into. So, but you got to take a swing at the fence and have fun and try. I mean, that's the joy of Fringe, Not everything's going to be the perfect, refined Stephen Son. There are going to be pieces that are learning and growing and developing. This is definitely one that is going places. It just, I think, would need a bit more refining.
It's fair. They did get patrons pick for
Teens Fest. Which tells me that maybe later on the run they settled more into it and it got a bit more honed in over time. Because I saw it very early, because I saw it on July the 4th. So that was second day of the Fringe.
Maybe even their first show, depending on.
According to the Fringe website, this was their second show.
Okay.
But still early. The show the night before. So it's very early on. And once again, you're young, you're finding your way. This is your first Fringe show. There's a lot of moving elements there. So once again, I give them those X factors on that. So yeah, awesome. All right, next is the one that you saw, Ryan, which was Unfurnished by 100 Flowers and the Modelechki Productions.
Your guess is as good as mine. I didn't realize how appropriately this ordering was, because I having not seen Get a Clue, I didn't know that the description I have for this one is kind of similar to the one you just gave for that. It's young people trying their best, maybe not hitting the mark entirely.
Was there murder in yours too?
Was there murder? trying to describe what happens in this play is a chore. I'm not gonna lie. So, okay, this is another one that I wrote a pretty critical review for intermission on. So I'll try to not just repeat all those points here. But yeah, this play is a mess. A fun mess, but a mess all the same.
Mhm.
It's written by Spencer Pearson and Luis Sanchez. It's directed by Seamus Tokel, and it has an 11-person cast, which, yeah, it's a lot. And I found there was very little cohesion between the cast. I described it in my intermission piece as it feels like the energy is similar to day one of an intermediate improv class. Everyone's trying just a bit too hard to be the funny guy, but they're not really bouncing off each other very well yet. So, yeah. So our basic setup is that we have this group of 20-something university students who want to have a house party, but the venue they've chosen for it is a house that belongs to their deceased high school teacher. At least I think the high school teacher is supposed to be deceased. There is a scene where they seem to call question to that very heavily, but then never address that again. And that's the vibe of this piece. It's a lot of it feels a lot like sketch comedy, but it markets itself as a farce. A new farce is what it says right here on the program. But yeah, the farces are predicated on, it's not just that random stuff happens, it's that there is usually a design, a clockwork to it of complications upon complications, but building towards some sort of satisfying ending where everything kind of makes sense. And that's what this play sorely lacked. It really just, it watched a bunch of farces, seemed to recognize that there's a lot of random happenings and complications, but missed the part where it's all supposed to build towards something meaningful. And, a very well sort of reasoned payoff to all of the things that seem random at first. But yeah, so we have the house party in the supposedly dead teacher's house. And there's something of value in the couch that they have in this house, that various competing parties are all converging on this location because they want what's between the cushions. And I don't even think this counts as a spoiler. It's drugs. It's just drugs. When they reveal that the characters seem to acknowledge that's like, okay, that's an expectable result when they finally do determine that. But I'm like, I was kind of hoping for something a little more creative than that.
Ron, it's always drugs. Well, just say no to drugs, as Nancy Reagan would say.
Like, it would either be drugs or money. Those are the two predictable things it could have been. But, it seemed like it was going for something zanier. Zany is the operative word for so much of what's happening here. And it was pretty much just, yep, it's what you expect. So there's various gangsters. The gangsters all hold like water guns, super soakers, which I feel like is gesturing at something similar to what we saw in Stiff & Sons with like the cardboard high artifice property, but it was only with the firearms that they seemed to be doing this. It wasn't like a consistent use of artifice throughout the whole. Yeah, so there's a real estate agent who's trying to sell the property and hates that her friends who she went to high school are trying to have a party there. There's gangsters who are trying to get to the couch. There's other gangsters who are trying to beat the other gangsters to the couch. There's random happenings just all throughout this thing. And I'm really struggling to think what the actual story of the piece is. There's so many characters in this. The closest thing to a relationship we establish between any of the characters is that two of them, Wilson, his name is, who's played by Ben Rosenberg, and Mill, played by Deslin Bach, they have recently broken up, and yet seem like they're still in the same social circle, and she's trying very hard to make him jealous, and it's working way too easily. And like that made for some funny gags, but there was no real culmination to this relationship. You would expect maybe they'll get back together by the end of this, maybe there'll be some sort of revelation, but it just kind of goes nowhere. Just, again, some half-hearted cast shout-outs, because I think there's some fun stuff in here. There's a character named Nellie, who is played by Chelsea Bowler. She's the loud one, I guess, in a show where everybody's trying to be the funny guy. She's the one who goes the hardest, I think, on that goal. Yeah. And yeah, honestly, she was just so over the top. I did genuinely chuckle at some of her stuff a number of times. It gets to be a bit much, but then it kind of cycles back to being funny again because it's just so much. There's a character named Jackie, played by Kylie Martinez. She's the closest thing we get to a likable one. Consequently, she's the one who maybe is given the least to do or feels sort of the most superfluous to the main plot, but at least she's charming, so it kind of balances out some of this. One of our two playwrights, Spencer Pearson, plays a guy named Blake who's wearing like a suit and bow tie at this young person party. And I guess he's the nerdy one. He's like doing a degree in agriculture, which doesn't seem to fit his whole vibe and getup, but I kind of feel like he's supposedly best friends with Wilson, who's like the dudiest bro of all dude bros. And you kind of look at these two guys and you're like, why are these two friends? They seem like complete polar opposites in a way that feels irreconcilable. And it's never really explained. It kind of reminds me of the Ed Helms, Bradley Cooper relationship from the Hangover movies. Like, why are these two guys supposedly best friends? How is Zach Galifianakis harshing their nar? How would there have been any nar between these two guys to begin with?
So much nar, Ryan. So much nar.
Yeah. I will say one of my favorite characters, and this just doesn't bode well for the show, was one of the gangsters' henchmen named Zeke, who was played by Lee Trong. And he only speaks one line in the whole show where he says that he likes ducks. I like ducks is his one line that he says a few times. And if that guy is the
Who doesn't like ducks?
Yeah, I like ducks, and I guess that's what made him my favorite. But if that's my favorite character in this show, then I feel like something's gone wrong in the design of it. They're throwing a lot against the wall. The cast is clearly having fun, and I'm happy for them. But it was few and far between in which that fun permeated into the audience. And I just kind of wish they were doing sketch comedy instead of forcing themselves to pretend that what they're doing is a farce. Because maybe this would have been able to genuinely generate more chuckles if it was just like, here's a funny thing and now here's another funny thing, as opposed to trying to pretend those funny things all belong within the same play, and that play supposedly has a plot, but that plot is completely all over the map and never really builds to anything meaningful. So I'm sorry, team, this one really didn't do it for me, but I'm glad you had a good time with it, and I occasionally did too.
Yeah. All right, moving on. Because I mean, well, once again, it is what it is. I mean, not every show's going to hit right with everybody,
it's Fringe.
But that's okay.
Yeah, part of the vibe of Fringe is that you're going to see good things, you're going to see bad things, you're going to see bold attempts at things, and it's part of the experience. If you see a large volume of shows like we do, this is what you're in store for, and I wouldn't really have it any other way. It just means that some things aren't going to be as compelling as others.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, next one is one you and I both saw. Which is Canceled, which is by POV Productions and Third Wheel Theater Company. It was directed by Henrik Sundsper. It was directed and written by them actually. So there you go.
Okay, so
Ryan, where do you start on this one?
Another one I didn't care for. Apologies, team. So I was intrigued by this.
Yeah.
Like, cancel culture is such a strange element of our current zeitgeist. The various ways that people have completely different conversations about it, or it means completely different things to different people. So, it's topical. I was curious. I don't think this play has a very nuanced understanding of what cancel culture even is, let alone how to grapple with it in a meaningful way. I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but, you've already gotten some pretty not great reviews. I'm sorry to be adding on to it, but this one really didn't work for me. I guess our basic premise, we begin with a framing device of an author at a typewriter for some reason, trying to tell the truth, but people don't want to hear it. So already I'm like, this is going to be insufferable. And it didn't disappoint in that expectation.
Person named Chad.
Yeah, so within what this author is supposedly coming up with, we zero in on a story where it's some kind of discount Franz Kafka's The Trial, where are they in high school? Was this ever determined? They feel like they're supposed to be in high school. I thought
it was university.
Maybe university. Either way, children
it felt like university.
Of some kind. Yes, young people. So our main character, who is our playwright director playing him, is Chad. And he is on trial by his peers, a group of 4 of them, who for cancelable offenses, I guess is how we put it.
Robbery, assault, and grievous bodily harm.
Yeah. So he stole money from some kind of fundraiser, apparently.
Which is what the party was for, yeah.
What the party was for. He also maybe sexually assaulted one of his classmates. Yeah. He, at one point, we're told that he did get out of some sort of juvenile correctional facility, something that he doesn't deny. So we basically were given the testimony of all of his peers, and he never gets a chance to defend himself. And they're so quick to cancel me. I don't even get to say my thing, or where, they're just lying because they want to cancel me, which we're told very explicitly that is indeed the case. Yeah. And
it ends with him losing his voice. He is no one.
He is no one, because that's what it means to be canceled. I have a hard time not being harsh on this one. What did you like about it? You said you had more positive feelings than me.
I mean, once again, cancel culture, very fascinating to me in this day and age. It's such a interesting topic. But I agree. I don't think this piece hit the bullseye on it. I really wish it did. I think, just like you said, how sometimes Stephen Son spoon-fed the audience, I felt this fell into the same trap, where it's the whole thing with cancel culture and why people get divided on it is because the situations that create cancel culture things are usually a he said, she said. Like you will not know the answer because we were not in the room. We are going based on testimonies from two people, and sometimes the wrong thing gets decided upon. So there are situations where cancel culture is it lives in the gray zone. It's not. It kind of comes from that space of where, and that's why cancel culture is such a divisive thing, is because some people go, well, you're canceling that person, but it's there are certain times where cancel culture is a he said, she said. Other times it's more about art, where it's hey, Dickens was a horrible human being to his family, but he wrote really good art. Where's the line? Because some people say you can separate the art from the artist. Some people say, no, I can't. Dickens was a horrible person, ergo we should never read one of his books again. Cancel culture is one of those things where it lives in the gray in some cases. Not every time. Once again, there are some cases that we view are black and white, where it's hey, this person did this, ergo they should be, removed from XYZ. So yeah, cancel culture is one of these things where I feel it could have been less spoon-feedy and more great. I don't get why this one Mean Girl character created a whole mob of against this Chad guy.
Well, that's exactly the problem, is that this play has no concept of why the legitimately good reason why some people do and have gotten canceled.
Yeah, absolutely. Robbery, assault, grievous bodily harm.
Well, but even if from Chad's perspective, all of those things are untrue. And I can understand yes, occasionally people make accusations that aren't substantiated, that do ruin someone's reputation unfairly. But cancel culture as a concept emerged in the aftermath of things like Weinstein and Bill Cosby and powerful men who went unquestioned for too long and are finally having their victims listened to and being tried in a court of public opinion when previous institutional and legal frameworks wouldn't even begin to take claims seriously. Absolutely. And yes, there are maybe reasonable critiques to, I don't even want to say cancel culture going too far, but the ambiguity of how do you know when a case is warranted and one isn't, and the fact that it is whipped up by a court of public opinion that doesn't follow the same legal and due process protocols of an actual legal institution, which is part of it's part of the point of it, that when we are not being served justice by the proper institutions, we do need to take justice into our own hands in some way. But the version of it we're presented in this play is just that, man, I'm being canceled because this one person's a jerk and she got everyone to also be a jerk. And I wonder, this playwright, what is your relationship to cancel culture? What were you canceled by someone? I don't know anything about this person, but what compels someone to write this play? Like, you clearly, I think, have an axe to grind and a sort of skewed interpretation of what this entails. But I don't want to speculate, but I can't. Yeah. There's one moment in particular where Chad refers to one of the other people as by a specific slur for a cognitively disabled person that starts with an R that I will not repeat here. And, me knowing that this is a play about getting canceled, I kind of remember that line and I'm like, oh, that's probably going to come up in the trial here that, I used the wrong words and now I'm getting canceled. But that doesn't even come up. Nobody even questions that, which also just makes me think that the playwright thinks this is an appropriate, acceptable thing to call someone, that it's not even used as evidence for people are too sensitive about the language I use. Like, it's just like fundamentally from the ground up, I don't know what this play is trying to do. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I think definitely part of the issue was the situation itself didn't lend itself to the debate of cancel culture. Like, if they had done, like, just choose one thing that this guy has done, whether that is a robbery or
but nobody gets canceled for robbery. That's just a normal crime that people get tried for. Like, it's also just like such a strange selection of items, most of which don't even fall within the matrix of cancel culture or the things that people get canceled for.
So, like, you know what, then in that case, like, if I was to choose out of the three that they list here in the bio of robbery, assault, and grievous bodily harm, I would have done the assault one. Because that one opens the door for a conversation. Because, I mean, I will admit, as a Don in university, when people are drinking for the first time, going out and partying for the first time, there are these situations where, kids are, at the time, consent was still being, talked about more than it ever had been. Like, we actually had to have seminars in our Don training about what is consent, how do you make sure you instruct your students properly on it. Because up till then, we hadn't really talked about it in that way. Like, I still remember the, consent is like tea video that came out. I don't know if you ever watched that video.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that it came out during our Dawn training, so we all had to watch it and discuss it and kind of use that as the framework. So it's like, I would have picked just one of those situations and honed in on that, and then actually have a proper court trial, public opinion debate on it, versus trying to do these three different things where you're flashing forward, flashing back. Like, I think if you just honed in the piece a bit,
like, there's
making it a little bit less scattershot, buckshot, where once again, cancel culture is an interesting topic. I just wish this show is a bit more refined.
Well, yeah, there's a thing in the program note here about how at some point in time, we as a society agreed that canceling someone's existence was a better option rather than educating them into being better. And look, two things about that. One, the rehabilitative option is never even presented in this play. Like, if that's the idea that you want to present of don't cancel people, rehabilitate people, like, that doesn't work if the whole premise is that he's being falsely accused. If I did nothing wrong, why do I need to be rehabilitated?
Right.
And thing number two about that is cancel culture exists for the people who insist they did nothing wrong, many of whom actually did, so that people who don't want to be rehabilitated, this is kind of the last resort of how to deal with them. I think most people doing the canceling would love for people to learn their lesson and change and be better. But this is such an unnuanced interpretation of these events that, I don't know. We can move on, but this was a particularly frustrating one. I'm not going to lie. Apologies to the whole team.
I mean, this show has a lot of potential with the topic. I just think, once again, it needs to be refined because they do have a dramaturg listed as part of their team.
Yeah, and it's impossible for us to know what it looked like before the dramaturg intervened, what was the basis of that intervention. I will say the one thing that
really didn't work for me was the singing, the choral singing there.
Okay, that it's so funny.
Truth.
So that I didn't mind that so much, because at least if it's trying to say that this is a bit of a mob mentality situation, then having some element of chorality kind of at least signposts that. One thing I thought was actually kind of neat was this weird voiceover thing.
Yes,
where it's
that
like
was
all of them.
that was all the cast. They had recorded the
Yeah,
lines. And
which
then
like it sounded
together.
it sounded awful, but I think that was at least the point they were going
Yes.
for. That it is this sort of amorphous blob of voices,
Yeah.
like that.
The
It kind of
mob.
it reminded me of the weird baby face made of robots at the end of Matrix 3. I guess, yeah, I found a compliment for the show. I thought that was neat, but I'm sorry. Otherwise, this show really didn't do it for me.
Yeah. Fair enough. All right, let's go on to one that I saw by myself, which is Are You Lovin' It? Theater group Gumbo. And so, yeah, this piece, I know a lot of people really liked it.
Okay.
I can't count myself as someone who loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely will applaud the cast for their energy. They were very energetic. They got the audience involved. They were like you could tell the cast was giving it their all. We're having fun with it. The costumes were bright. They were fun. This piece comes all the way over from
Japan, I think.
Japan, yes. Yeah, Japan, yeah. And so, but I came away going, what was that piece? Like, I couldn't quite get my handle on what the piece was trying to say. Like, at one point I thought, is it trying to say that we're all suckers for corporations? Because the whole thing is that this whole show is all about Whack-Donald's, which is a very clear parody of McDonald's.
Like it's in the name. Are you loving it?
Yes. Yeah. And so, but then the piece kept going on when it kind of fell at the natural end point. And then at one point we got into politics where they were trying to get the audience on both sides of Biden and Trump, and the audience wasn't going for either one of them.
Well, yeah, they maybe didn't find their moment for that kind of counterposing.
I mean, yeah. So I couldn't quite get my handle on this piece, but I will say the actors were giving it their all. Like they were going for it. So the Japanese businessman who was very energetic was played by Royo Nishishara. I apologize if I butchered your last name, but you were great. You definitely had a lot of energy, and you sold the whole concept of working yourself to death in corporate Western American society. But like the physicality he brought to that role, and he just going for it, like ham-hearted, big action. So
nice.
Good on you.
You can try to describe what actually happens in the show, because he sort of skipped over like a plot summary, which I get that this was a strange, stringy piece, but for the benefit of people who want to learn what this show even was, could you maybe give us something?
The plot. It's like Monty Python, and now for something completely different. Like I couldn't, like that's part of my issue with this piece overall, is that why I can't get my hand on it is because I don't get the plot. There really isn't one. It's almost like a game show with these characters. But there, once again, there's no, why are they on the show? What's going on here? Like at one point, we have the Japanese businessman who then loses all his intestines after working too hard. You then have another character who brings on her baby, but she's not loving her baby. So eventually it gets thrown in like a milkshake situation. She's spraying aerosols. She has a diaper changing scene with the baby. Yeah, like once again, like that's part of the thing is I can't quite get a plot summary on this piece. But the energy was great. Like it was a lot of fun. Like it was big. It was like it was energetic. But I could not for the life of me like you said, give me a 2-minute plot summary of this show.
Like would you call it sketch comedy at least, or is that not even quite right?
Maybe like sketch variety show.
Okay, like, so then it doesn't have to have a plot.
Almost like a Japanese game show.
Okay.
Type energy.
Yeah, like it doesn't necessarily, if that is the vibe they're going for, that it doesn't necessarily have to have a plot like in a narrative sense, but at least, yeah, so corporate satire, McDonald's, that is kind of I guess the through line. Yeah, I didn't see it unfortunately, so I can't comment
like once again, like trying to describe this piece is so hard because I couldn't quite figure out what they were trying to tell me. Like at one point you're throwing all your insecurities into the milkshake and showing your insecurities as an audience, which then somehow gets sucked up by the cast and they become all corporate Whack-Donalds-y figurines at the end. But they were so energetic. And I will say, in your interview with Phil, you talked about posters and the importance of having a good poster. And I will say, out of all the posters of this Fringe, this one caught my eye, and that's why I wanted to see it, was because the byline about having a dancing businessman and dancing Trump and McDonald's, and you have this kind of very vibrant poster. They got me in, and the energy kept me interested. I just came away going, I don't quite get this piece entirely.
Okay, fair.
But the audience was loving it. Like they were.
Thus the title.
Yeah, I mean, it was a sold out show, and the audience was laughing. They were cheering. But I don't know if you asked them either, like, how would you describe this show? What they could quite describe it as?
Yeah, I think, I did hear a lot of buzz about this one, but also a lot of polarizing mixed reception to this one, which, so it sounds like you're on the more dislike critical end, but I'm sure.
Not even dislike, but we're just like, it was fun, but I couldn't quite get a grasp on it. Maybe I'm not the target audience who
That's also
get
possible.
this piece.
Yeah.
So I fully acknowledge that, this is a piece that maybe there's something that I'm missing that other people have gotten. But I did enjoy myself. I laughed. I cheered.
That's good.
I couldn't quite tell you what this piece was really
what was I cheering at exactly?
Exactly. Maybe that's the point too. Is you eat Whack-Donald's or McDonald's and it's a bit of an empty, hollow burger.
Junk food theater.
Junk food theater. You're supposed to come away going, okay, the businessman works too hard. The woman with the baby doesn't want the baby, so she's coming outside, the gender roles and is unhappy with that. There's something there. I just can't quite wrap my head around and go, this is what this piece was. So, yeah.
Okay.
That's
right.
what I can kind of say about it. I didn't dislike it, but I also couldn't quite describe it in greater detail just because I still can't quite get my brain fully wrapped into it.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Pause
for a moment.
Pause. All right, and then next we have one that you saw, also on restaurant theme, which is Koli Kari, which almost made my list, but I chose to see Are You Loving It instead.
Wow, so you picked one restaurant play over a different restaurant play.
I did. And this is by Pink Banana Theater. So Ryan, tell us a bit about this piece.
Yeah, so this play is written by Ganesh Thava. It is directed by Sungwon Cho, and it stars a 3-person cast. The protagonist, Ravi, is played by Ganesh Thava himself. Yeah, this one, it's another one that I was really looking forward to, that I definitely don't, I won't say it didn't hit the mark, but it didn't necessarily grip me like I was expecting it to.
Right.
So our protagonist, Ravi, he is a young South Asian man who has a cooking show on, I think it's supposed to be on TV as opposed to like YouTube or public access Wayne's World type TV. It's unclear how successful the show is, but he has like a producer and like there's, it seems like it is more of like an operation than just himself in his own kitchen. There is someone telling him we're on air in 5, 4, 3. So, there's a budget here.
There's a budget somewhere in there.
Yeah. So he has a cooking show, and the opening hook is that he is going to share his mother's recipe for chicken curry, or as it's called in the original language, Koli Kari. That's the title. Okay. And this is his mother's special recipe. There is an element of a family heirloomness to it. And over the course of this piece, what seems like it's just we're in a grounded cooking show setting, kind of it turns into this sort of surreal, almost Dante's Inferno type of dream space of what exactly is happening here. But his mother shows up on the show very unexpectedly. Amma, as she's referred to in the show, she's played by Asha Ponachen. Apologies again with any mispronunciations. And his ex-girlfriend also makes an appearance. Her name is Annika. She's played by Anne Savermuthu. Both of those actors also take turns playing an anthropomorphic chicken, a giant chicken who shows up in the middle of him trying to cook this chicken curry, and a very well-designed costume for this chicken. I don't have the costume designer's name handy here. They didn't have a program. Apologies to whoever made this fun chicken costume. Good job. But yeah, as he's in the middle of doing this cooking demonstration of a recipe with sentimental importance to his family, we sort of go through a sequence of flashbacks, his relationship to his mother, his relationship to his ex. This is kind of a spoiler. We find out that he is a semi-closeted queer man, and a lot of this journey is about the difficulties of coming out to fairly conservative South Asian parents. and particularly his mother, and that's why his relationship didn't work out. That revelation, again, this is spoiler zone a bit, but was a very, I think, cleverly written use of the movie Magic Mike in dialogue, in terms of revealing, he watched Magic Mike, but not because his mother or his girlfriend wanted to see it, because he wanted to see it, and that kind of makes the audience realize something that had only been hinted to prior to that point in terms of his own queerness and identity. And there is a very touching moment with his mother in the end where she does seem kind of okay with that news, which I think is very sweet, and that is what it's building a lot toward. But yeah, there's a lot. I don't think this play was even particularly long, or maybe slightly over an hour, but I found like a lot of the pieces in the middle kind of felt long or dragged out a little bit, which kind of made it hard because it's dealing with layers upon layers of flashbacks and dream sequences and characters doubling, playing different people. I will admit I had a hard time really sinking my teeth into what's happening in each moment and how each one logically connects to the previous one. And as a result, with the difficulties of following this convoluted plot, it was hard for me to really sink in and love this piece, which is unfortunate because I do think it has a lot of really good things going for it. The cast was game. They did a very good job. Ganesh playing the main character as also the writer. Clearly, I think there is like a personal, semi-autobiographical element to this that I would imagine was very personal to him in constructing it. The relationship to his Indian culture, to food, to queerness, his relationship to his mother, etc., etc. I think while I did find that the anthropomorphic chicken was very well designed, I think a problem that I sort of detected with it is that it's kind of just too silly for the profound, meaningful ways that I think they ultimately wanted to use it. Because the first time it appears, it's like, oh my God, this play just got surreal. What's happening? And it is supposed to throw you off guard and make you laugh. But then it keeps coming back in increasingly more philosophical and meaningful ways. But every time it showed up on stage, the audience chuckled because, haha, there's the chicken that we know is funny. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I think it was undercutting a lot of the meaningfulness that it's trying to imbue in here. And it's a shame because I got after a certain point that there's something innately profound about the chicken's presence here. But it's almost just it's too silly a vessel for that meaning, that I don't blame the audience for laughing, even in the moments when I feel like it's no longer funny. I don't know, I was told, I remember reading something about this play that there is a gustatory element to it, that he is cooking the chicken curry over the course of the production, and that at the end it will be fed to a portion of the audience. They did tell us, the front of house, because I guess there's allergy concerns and warnings about this, that if, only people who sit in a certain corner of the first few rows will get any of it. So yeah, I guess to me, that element wound up feeling like a gimmick. He did indeed at the end of the play give some of the chicken curry to some of the audience. And I can understand the meaning of this in terms of allowing the audience to engage with multiple of their senses, an experience of this culture and the cultural heritage, his mother's recipe that is being presented to us here. But it I feel like it sort of has to be an all or nothing. If you only let some of the audience have it, then, some people are getting a vastly different experience of this than others. And I can understand, certain people with allergy concerns maybe should be allowed to say, no, thank you. But I feel like it just giving some people in the first two rows, it kind of makes, I wasn't going to force myself into one of those rows just to participate in that element of the piece.
But Ryan, you and audience, not wanting audience participation?
It was very light audience participation, and you do just get fed, which I would have enjoyed. But I love Indian food. Yeah, I don't know. Because it was sort of part of the advertising of the show, this is an element, it didn't feel like it was so meaningful to the piece by virtue of the fact that most of the audience didn't get it, and it doesn't really change the experience. It only changes the experience of the people who happen to be let in on it. Yeah, again, there's a lot of things about this play. And again, this is another one where maybe there's cultural elements that don't necessarily resonate with me personally. I might not be the target audience for a lot of this, and I don't want to fault it for any of that. I think if there certainly are South Asian people who related to this in a way different than me, I would never want to take that experience away from them. But yeah, on the whole, maybe just a few more drafts of the script, I think there's a lot of interesting connections to Ravi Jain's play A Brimful of Asha, which also deals with South Asian man, overbearing mother, cooking on stage. So there's definitely, right down to the fact that the protagonist's name is Ravi. I haven't read other people's reviews of this. I wonder if anyone else noticed that connection. It just seems interesting. But yeah, I think even arranged marriages is a point of connection in both of those plays. That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That's where I sort of stand with Koli Kari. It's a play that I wanted to like more than I did like, but I do think it still had a lot going for it. And yeah, the final beat with the coming out, I do think was really powerful. Good note to send the audience home on. But yeah, another pass of the script would probably do it good, in my opinion.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So Ryan, next up is another show by you, or not by you, but one you saw individually, which is Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. Ryan, did you get some garlic bread at this one or some spaghetti and meatballs?
I did not. Unlike Koli Kari, there was no food interaction with the audience.
What?
Nobody was fed. Yes, but we got a feast for the eyes, I guess is the best way of putting it. So fans of the Cup and followers of our Instagram might have noticed that I did a bit of an experiment with embedded criticism in this one.
Yes.
In a couple weeks prior to the beginning of Fringe, I was invited into the rehearsal process to kind of report on that experience. We made a little video of that experience where I interviewed the director, choreographer, Adam Martino, and we posted that in our Instagram story. I took some interesting rehearsal video of the piece that spliced all that together. It was a great experience that I enjoyed doing. And now let's see how I can justify having done that by integrating that experience into my final appraisal of the piece, which I didn't just see in rehearsal. I did see it during Fringe too. So Scenes from an Italian Restaurant by Breakaway Entertainment. Like I said, directed and choreographed by Adam Martino. Its associate director and dramaturg is Beth Hart, and associate choreographer is Elena Collette. And it stars 7 dancers, including Elena Collette herself. But this is kind of like a jukebox musical. I asked Adam if that was a term that he felt was appropriate, and he thought it's kind of doing some of that, but also its own thing. That uses the music of Billy Joel, thus the title, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, and Elton John, these two kind of classic adult contemporary musicians that pretty much everybody loves. Like, it's very hard to not love either of these musicians. I feel like anybody who says they don't like Elton John or Billy Joel whatsoever is just, they're saying that out of like childhood rebellion against their parents because it's the music their parents likes. But like, yeah, how could anybody not love this music? It's pretty darn great. And yeah, like people, I've been reading some people's reviews of this where they open by like, I just love Billy Joel. Like everybody loves Billy Joel. It's
who
fine,
doesn't love Billy Joel?
Everybody loves Elton John, and Elton John especially because he scored so much of our childhood in all those Disney movies. And Billy Joel was in Oliver and Company. He played the Artful Dodger.
That's right, he did. Forget that one.
Yeah, I never forget that. I love that movie as a kid. Anyway, so this is kind of mostly dance-heavy jukebox musical using the work of those two musical artists. And there is a bit of a plot. It is kind of, I would call the plot a little thin, but I don't think it's the main reason for engaging with the story, where a protagonist who is referred to as the Piano Man, played by Anibal Ortega, is a semi-successful musician who is trying to regain his passion for music after having a not great experience with a corrupt manager and being relegated to an opening act when he knows he has all this potential to be the star. And so he's broken free from his contract and his tour, and he's rekindling his passion for music by playing the piano at a local Italian restaurant. And he develops a bit of a romantic relationship with the owner of that restaurant, played by Sidney Keir. But his evil manager, who is played by Elena Collette, who is also the associate choreographer of this piece, is coming for him to get him back into the life that he left behind, the success and the glory, but at what cost if he's losing his passion for music. There's also some very excellent supporting players who in very good ensemble dance roles. We have our tour crew who are sort of like comedy relief characters, played by Sean Death and Matthew Eldritcher, and 2 other restaurant patrons played by Beatrice Kwan and Jennifer Kehoe. And so that's our core ensemble, but this is ultimately a semi-musical, mostly dance piece first and foremost. A lot of the songs are sung on stage by Annabelle in particular as the piano man, but a lot of them are just you're listening to the tracks of the studio recorded versions that you know and love that you've heard on countless greatest hits CDs in your dad's car, probably. I think, yeah, this piece is very strong. When I interviewed Adam Martino, he described it as being an explosion for the eyeballs. And that, more so than anything, I think is a very good way of putting it. Like, the dancing is all incredible, such beautiful ensemble work that does a great job of just being a visual feast. We maybe don't get garlic bread, but we do get to enjoy the way that these dancers feed our souls with their beautiful choreography. I think the story, it's there as a pretext for seeing the dancing and hearing the music, but I don't know how organically, like, I found the story, it was there, but I wasn't necessarily compelled by it. Sometimes it just felt like distractions before we got to the next very interesting dance piece. There are only maybe a handful of numbers in particular. Saturday Night for Fighting, which was a bit of a West Side Story kind of clash between the manager and the piano man. Yeah, there was some of that, not as on the nose as I'm making it sound, but it did very much give that vibe. I think, the She's Always a Woman to Me sort of is the culmination of the romantic subplot between the piano man and the restaurant owner. Like, all of these things, they work very well, but the narrative, I think, is a little thin, and it's not the main reason for seeing this. I wrote down a lot of notes from this, both from my rehearsal experience and from seeing it in the end. Yeah, I guess just the point. Yeah, I wonder with the piano man's character arc, kind of, that, it seems like he's disappointed that he's the opening act, that he's not the headliner, and that's why he breaks out of his contract. But it also feels like, how is being the star at the bar in the Italian restaurant necessarily like a good antidote to that sure, you are the, everyone's coming to see you, like the line in Piano Man, but it also just doesn't feel like, it seems like your gripe isn't that your manager was exploiting you as much as it is that you were playing second fiddle to someone else. And so being first fiddle in a smaller venue, I don't know, I guess is questionable. And some of the story stuff is just like how much he resolves his situation of being exploited by this manager, and the manager gets exposed in some way that's a little unclear. But yeah, because he very much stakes a lot of his journey on, I can't let what happened to me happen to others, but it's unclear how him breaking free from his contract succeeds at that. Again, a lot of the stuff is told through interstitial monologues and radio sequences where a newscaster fills us in on what happened. And yeah, I guess as much as I enjoy this piece, and I think the dancing and the songs are a big part of what's really gets the oomph in the soul about it, I either feel like we needed to go harder on the story or dial it back. It's sort of currently living in this middle zone where there's not enough of it to justify its outsized presence, but it also is maybe not leading us into the dances as well. If this was just like a full dance piece from beginning to end, I don't even think it needs the story, because we could also recognize the setting and a musician, and we know the songs. The songs all have lyrics that tell their own stories in some way that I don't know if we really do, need as much as it as we did. And again, that's just kind of a minor gripe, but I think that's where I'm at with a lot of it. Yeah, I wonder how familiar they are with Moving Out, the already existing Billy Joel jukebox musical. I was reluctant to ask about that when I did my interview with the director choreographer, because that one is at least, I think, trying to, I've never actually seen it myself, but based on what I understand about it, I think it's like taking the characters from Billy Joel's song lyrics and making a story about them. Whereas you could kind of squint your eyes and think that this is doing that, but with Billy Joel himself as the character from Piano Man. And Adam actually told me an interesting story when I talked to him about how Billy Joel himself, in fairly recent memory, I meant to look into this in more detail and sadly didn't get around to doing that, where he recently had to release a new song because he was under contractual obligation to do it. And he's gone on the record and said that he doesn't like the song. He doesn't think it's good, but he was just forced to. So I think that's where a lot of the story comes from, is if someone like Billy Joel, who's been the soundtrack of so much of the music we love, has lost his passion for music because of the legal contractual restraints that he's put under, that maybe if he were to live a life similar to his lyrics to Piano Man, he would find the love for music again. And maybe in real life he did. But yeah, so I don't think the story doesn't come from an organic place. I just feel like The dancing is all incredible. Everyone's bringing their A game. The ensemble players in particular, I really want to give them a special shout out because I think they fill in the space so well and they do such a good job. But yeah, it's, I kind of wish it would just let itself be more of a dance piece and recognize that the story is so secondary that it could have been even more tertiary, perhaps.
Fair.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it. Good show. Also a patron's pick in Al Green, which is a hard venue to sell.
Yes, it is. All right, Ryan, one more that's just by you that only you saw, and it is Escape from Toronto, Pliskin Productions. So,
yes.
Ryan.
Okay. I have very complicated thoughts about this one. So this was one that kind of was initially just on like a maybe list for me when I was deciding what to see at Fringe this year. And then I bumped it up to a definitely after my interview with Phil Rickaby because he gave a very emphatic recommendation for this one. And I liked it overall. Here's what I'll say. The basic premise here is that it's like the movie Escape from New York, very, 1980s John Carpenter action movie, and its sequel, Escape from LA, a very 90s John Carpenter action movie, where Kurt Russell plays the character Snake Plissken, a disgraced war hero turned prisoner who's sent on these, I guess, heist jobs into a maximum security prison to save the president or the president's daughter, to retrieve a black box. But the hook of those movies is that in the first movie, Escape from New York, that in the future, 1997, because the movie's from 1981, I think, New York City or Manhattan has been turned into a maximum security prison. So all of America's undesirables and prisoners are thrown into Manhattan Island, which is heavily fortified. And now the president's plane went down inside Manhattan, so Snake Plissken has to go in and save the president. That's the pitch for Escape from New York. The sequel, basically the exact same premise, but this time it's LA is the separated from the rest of the country, dangerous place, bad news, send in Snake Plissken. So the premise for this comedy show is, Tamlin Bryson, who plays literally Snake Plissken. There she is, if you can see on the screen there. She's painted a beard. Painted a Kurt Russell-esque beard on her face. She's wearing an eye patch. Just looks like the character. Yeah. She's playing literally Snake Plissken. And the premise is that they've toured this show all over to various different fringes. And each fringe, they do it escape from whatever city they're currently in. So they've done Escape from Edmonton, I think Escape from Winnipeg, maybe Escape from Calgary. This one is Escape from Toronto because, hey, we're in Toronto. Yeah. And I'm not even certain where these performers come from, if they're from Toronto originally, but they cater the show to whichever city they're in. Okay. Here's why I need to get into my complicated thoughts about this. I had never seen Escape from New York or Escape from LA. There are movies that I kind of always knew by reputation, but just, you can't see every movie. You never get around to everything. But so in the anticipation of seeing this show, I'm like, I should watch Escape from New York so I can get the references. This feels like a parody of a very specific movie. So wouldn't it be fun to have that movie fresh in my head so I can see exactly what they're parodying? Escape from New York is really boring. I did not like it as a movie. And here's the thing. It's not what I was expecting at all, because I was expecting, Kurt Russell, action guy, pew pew, dangerous place. And I'd also always heard that part of what transcends the movie beyond just a gimmicky action premise is that it was a social satire on the culture of New York in particular, and the way that the city was going to hell in a handbasket at that time in the 80s. That future vision of 1997, where it's basically a maximum security prison and gangs of thugs are just roaming the place, that there was going to be like cutting satire about New York culture. And watching the movie, I feel like it was neither an exciting action movie, nor was it a scathing commentary on New York in the 80s or 90s. Like, it's like a good half hour into the movie where before he even throws a punch, and it's like 10 minutes later that he even fires a gun for the first time, and builds to kind of like a very anticlimax, in my opinion. Like, it wasn't exciting as an action movie like I'd always assumed it was. And I found the satire was kind of toothless. It didn't really seem like, granted, it's from a different time, and maybe I understand that New York back then is very different than the heavily gentrified New York now, so it's parodying something that no longer exists. but it didn't feel like it was doing that much heavy critique, in my opinion. So I left that movie watching it the night before seeing this show, and I was like, okay, that's not what I was expecting it to be. Let's see what this show does. I also wanted to watch Escape from LA to see what that energy brought, but I didn't get a chance to watch that before. This show is really weird because it is a very specific, pointed parody of Escape from New York. It's literally Snake Plissken escaping from different cities. But it seems to be parodying something that the movie itself isn't. It's very much using, I think, the premise of Snake Plissken escape from a city to do more of just like a broad stroke genre parody of 80s, 90s action movies. But Escape from New York kind of doesn't feel like it belongs within the bundle of things that it's parodying because it's so unlike the kind of tropey genre movies from that period that I was expecting it to be. And again, this comes down to a common critique that I've seen a lot of other people make about this show is it's very heavy on the misogyny. And, you know, it's funny because it's a woman dressed as a man making these jokes about how misogynistic movies were from that period. But it kind of doesn't really feel like it's have as much to say in terms of a critique of the misogyny of that period. It's just pointing out that it is misogynistic, but in a way that kind of invites the audience to laugh at misogynistic jokes, not laugh at how misogynistic things were back then. You know, there's a very frequent gag where Snake would make a misogynistic joke, and the co-star Rod Peter Jr., who's also there and co-wrote the show with Tamlin, where, you know, Snake would say something misogynistic and Rod would be like, you know, that's not very funny, it's pretty misogynistic, and refuse to give the high five that is being demanded. So that Snake would just get a high five from a guy sitting in the front row in the audience. And I think if you're inviting the audience to co-sign your misogynistic joke with a high five and actually succeeding at getting it, I don't really think you're deconstructing misogyny. I think you're just being misogynistic. And the fact that it's a female performer doesn't really do enough to sell that as a critique or a satire. And it's just so weird to me because they're doing all of this over-the-top action stuff that isn't what Escape from New York is. So it seems strange to build what is kind of a larger genre satire around something that isn't really an example of the thing you're parodying. For all of the jokes about misogyny in here, Snake Plissken isn't even really a misogynist. Like there aren't misogynistic jokes in these movies. They're almost very sexless movies. There's a lot of, you know, scantily clad women in these movies, but he never like sexually exploits anyone. He never makes jokes or comments on the way women are. Some women try to kiss him and he kind of just refuses because he has a mission to go on in these movies. And in Escape from LA, which I did watch after seeing the show, which I think is actually closer in tone to what I imagine Snake's first adventure, Escape from New York, to be, and closer to what I think they're trying to parody in this show. There's one uncomfortably transphobic moment in there, but that's like the closest thing we get to the problematic bygone era that they seem to be parodying here. And like, it's fine to be wanting to just do like an action parody, but it just seems so baffling to me that I have a hunch that a lot of people are like me prior to watching the movie, where this is something you know about from pop culture osmosis, but haven't actually seen. And would be very surprised to see what it is when you do eventually see it. But they've clearly watched the movie. There's a lot of jokes that are so specific to the original movies that, like, of course they've watched it. How could you make this show if you haven't? But it just seems like they're banking on the fact that the audience hasn't, so they can get away with making jokes that aren't actually about the thing that it seems like they're parodying. And yeah, like, there is a lot of, I think, in addition to just being 80s action parody, there is a lot of loving tribute to the broader oeuvre of John Carpenter. I almost say Jean Carpenter because the French word oeuvre made me soften the Jean into French. Because there's like, you know, there's nods to Halloween. I think I caught a reference to The Thing at one point.
Right.
But they also kind of pretend that all of these things are the same movie. Like there's one moment where there's a big fight scene where they break the fourth wall and say there's a scene in the original movie where characters like get into a 5-minute fist fight over a pair of sunglasses. And me having just watched Escape from New York, I'm like, I don't remember that happening. This movie has like so little compelling action. Like I would have remembered that. And then I remembered that happens in They Live, a different John Carpenter movie, right. The one that Zizek famously called a flaming trash can of ideology. Mm-hmm. But they're presenting it as if all of these things are Escape from New York when Escape from New York isn't any of these things. Anyway, that's a lot of the weird stuff about it. I'll say just a few compliments because I did enjoy. It was a fun time, but I had to just get all that off my chest because reading other people's reviews of this, everyone's just saying like, this is a funny throwback 80s action movie based on Escape from New York. I'm like, this, it's really weird that they've tricked the world into thinking this. And it makes me unsure what I think of the show. But the best thing about it, in addition to a lot of the jokes, which are very funny, maybe not the very heavy-handed misogynistic ones,
right,
is they do a lot of really great visual gags with an overhead acetate projector. And they do like explosions and motorcycle chases and skydiving and underwater adventures. All of these things are done projected with like the little plastic cutouts that I think is very funny. And they do a very good job. I don't want to seem like I'm too down on this show, but I think it's almost more interesting how bizarrely constructed this premise is when they really just want to do a spoof of action movies from this period, but they picked such a strange, specific anchor point that they present so explicitly as itself that it seems like a misguided parody of something that is so unlike the things that they actually seem to be treating as the targets of their parody. And anyway, that's my weird, convoluted thoughts about Escape from Toronto. I liked it.
It sounds very interesting.
It was interesting, but I think people are thinking it's interesting for the wrong reasons. And I'm very glad I did familiarize myself with the source material so that I could have these thoughts, because it almost made the experience more interesting because of them.
Gotcha.
Oof.
Well, let's talk about one you and I both saw.
Sure, let's do it.
Which is Artificially Intelligent, a Greek guy, Anastasi Danielis?
Anesti Danielis. Remember, he told us how to pronounce his name. He's an STD. Anesti D.
Right. Anesti Danielis. Anesti Danielis. All right, Ryan, tell us about this piece. What'd you think of it?
Okay, this one I also liked and thought was funny, but have some conceptual gripes with it, I guess, similar to the last one. Okay, so I've said in the past that I like seeing stand-up comedians at Fringe because Fringe often offers a forum where stand-up comedians can try something more experimental that maybe wouldn't fly in their usual 10-minute slots at nightclubs or comedy clubs. So, and I think this is a good example of that Anesti Danielis, apologies, he's a very funny stand-up comedian. He does a lot of like musical Bo Burnham type stand-up where he plays songs that are of a comedic nature. But he has a shtick for this hour of stand-up that is, as the title suggests, it's dealing with the very topical concept of AI, artificially intelligent being the name of the show. And I was intrigued by this because, there's in my line of work at the university and grading papers being a big part of what I do on a day-to-day, there's a lot of talk about ChatGPT and, what are we going to do? AI is getting so good at writing material that tricks you into thinking a human wrote it. No, it hasn't. It hasn't gotten there yet. Maybe soon, but not yet.
It's getting close, though, Ryan. It's getting close.
It's pretty easy to tell when it can't get the names of the characters in a Moliere play, right? So he marketed this show as being co-written with the AI.
Right.
And that's interesting because, there's a lot of conversations, especially with the recent Writers' Strike of America, where, film studios are trying to replace creative jobs with AI. And I think there is an interesting conversation to be had about, is there a creative way of using AI that, people, when I'm not the first to make this observation, but when photography was a new technology, a lot of people said that's not art. It's just capturing something that already exists. Photography will never be art. And sure enough, we now know that many people have found ways to be artful with photography, and there's still a way of having a human expression in something that just seems to be creating the art for you. And I think AI will have a similar journey in this way of right now we're saying it can't be art, there's no human agent, but humans might find a way to utilize it in a truly artful manner. And it'll be interesting when we do get to that point, and we'll have to have more serious questions about what human created or collaborated AI art might look like.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought this could be interesting. A stand-up show is co-written with the AI. Let's see how it engages with that question. I will say I think the AI here is used as a bit of a topical gimmick, more so than I think it is what I was maybe hoping the show would be. And I don't want to hold it to that arbitrary standard, but I think there's a more interesting version of the show in my head, which isn't really what we got here, where basically he has this glowing sphere orb that is the AI Siri type character that he has asked to write a stand-up show for him, because why am I putting myself through so much work when the technology exists? Just write a stand-up show for me. Right. But the AI says, I need training data to know what your vibe is like, so I can make a show in your style. So the whole, I'd say 2/3 of the show are basically him just doing his usual stand-up to create training data. So right off the bat, it's already just sort of a conventional stand-up show in this way, musical stand-up, but he's doing his, and the bits are all funny. I think he is a very good comedian, very funny. But it is very much just a straightforward show in that regard. And then in the end, we are given access to, presumably in response to all this training data, but it is revealed that it's something that was written in advance by an AI, which made him realize that he couldn't not trust an AI to write a stand-up show for him. I wrote it down here. I'm trying to find it. And here, I don't know if you have it written down. If you took
I don't have the name of the song.
Yeah, I wish I took better note, or I had too many notes from too many Fringe shows, but yeah, it was like not great.
Faggy, feta, Fringe
Greek
boy or something like that.
So something like that. It was basically a very offensive, just playing on the most brute stereotypes about his Greek identity, thus the feta cheese, his bisexual identity, thus the faggy. And so he plays this song that the AI legitimately did write, not in real time, but in advance of the show. And that made him realize that human creativity is safe because these machines are not able to produce genuine comedy. And it's fun. It was a good hour of stand-up. I enjoyed his jokes. I thought he was very funny, but to me, it just seemed like it's taking a newsworthy headline and pretending the show is more about that more than the show really is. But you also saw. What were your thoughts?
I did. And I mean, I will agree with you. I went in thinking, every song that's going to be done, it's going to be done live with AI, where AI generates some lyrics and then he improvs accompaniment because he's got the piano and he's got the guitar. I didn't, so that kind of threw me for a loop there when I started watching. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
When do we actually get into the AI musical part? Because that's what I wanted to see happen is he gives it some prompts and says, write me some lyrics based off, feta cheese, immigrant parents, and, giving up your job as an architect. And then, and then you see what lyrics it could maybe come up with. Because I recently got into Chat GPT using it.
You're part of the problem.
Well, it's fun. I mean, once again,
I know. I'm saying eventually it'll be like photography, a tool for artists, not just something being used to swindle artists out of their jobs.
Correct. It's very helpful in pulling research information for my podcast on musicals, where I'm like, hey, give me some resources and kind of a breakdown of The Wiz's production history, and it can give me a nice concise thing. It took 10 pages of my Sunday in the Park with George notes, got it down to 3. In a much more concise, consolidated way of telling that production history. So it does have purpose, once again, but there's some I have to go and fix.
Well, exactly. And it still requires the human agent, which I guess is part of the point. And I think, like you said, I was also expecting more engagement with AI wrote this, then I riff off it with this. I'd like to, there's enough humor that could be mined from how bad a job AI does that it almost feels like a missed opportunity to just let that be a stinger at the end rather than the thing we all came here to see, to play with it throughout.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'll give big shout outs to, because he just, once again, he was so charismatic. Just his audience interactions were terrific in the ways that he found audience members and riffed with them and played with them. You could tell he was having a lot of fun with this show and did a really great job building that rapport with the audience. By the time you get to the end, where we're like, we do want to hear the AI song because it looks like fun. So yeah, I mean, I thought you did great, and also just working along with the tech of the show with like the AI recorded voiceover that he has to play off of. I thought you did a pretty good job with that as well, making that like feel very natural and not to start the cue, stop the cue, start the cue, stop the cue. So I give shout out to that as well. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed the piece.
Yeah, he's funny.
It was one of my favorites I saw at Fringe this year.
That's good. I'm glad you came to see it then. And like you know, it's definitely upper tier for me, but I don't know. I guess my different expectations about what the show could have been made me mildly disappointed. When I think if he had just done an hour of stand-up as himself without presenting it this way, I would have thought that was great. And or if he had done something more meaningfully engaging with the questions of AI, that would have also been great. But this was trying to be both and made me kind of a little disappointed that didn't lean in either direction more as a through line, I guess.
Fair. All right, last show of the episode.
Whew.
And it is The Bluffs by Mid-20s Theatre Society. Points for them actually having a program. Not every show did, but I do appreciate shows that actually do hand out programs. Very much like it, but I also have the digital program here too. But Ryan, what is this piece about?
Yeah, so this is written by Sarini Kumar Singh. It is directed by Jackie Sorwa, who also designed the props. And it has a 4-person cast. So this is a ghost story. And this is another one I already reviewed for intermission. Try to not repeat all those same points. But we're introduced to our main character, Eleanor, played by Shalena Cristanti. Okay, so Eleanor's wife, Lori, has recently died. And Eleanor, following the advice of a self-help podcaster who's played by Justine Christensen, decides to go back to her late wife's cliffside cabin and is going to sell it and sort of, part of her healing process, break ties with the past. And when she shows up, she realizes that her former brother-in-law, Jordan, played by Malcolm Green, has been squatting in this. It is his family's cottage, even if in all of the legal aftermath of Lori's death, it does legally belong to Eleanor, which he's not happy to find out that Eleanor is going to be selling it.
Correct.
And then, so, both of them are obviously grieving in their own ways. They both had their own kinds of fraught relationships with the deceased. But then Macy, who is one of the prospective buyers of the cottage, shows up, a neighbor, played by Sydney Watson. She instantly feels the presence in the house. And it turns out she says she's a medium. So I'm going to help you do a seance. And because Eleanor in particular...
Well, she doesn't do the seance. She gets prompted to by brother-in-law.
Right.
Try and trick Eleanor.
Yes. So, but because Eleanor does want to commune with the dead, and it does feel like there's unfinished business that she has, that there's an apology maybe that needs to be made. Who needs to apologize to who is a different story. But so they have a seance, and the lamplights have been flashing in a very erratic way, and it's a ghost story for a reason. There will indeed be a ghost
story, as the program says.
Which I don't know how. I don't know how gothic I would really call it. I don't know upon what basis they're describing it as such, because there's a ghost in an old house. I don't know. I think there's a lot of, slippage when it comes to these genres.
Is there a ghost, Ryan?
There is. I think the ghost is pretty explicit. Whether or not the ghost is a man or
okay. Yes, they make it very clear in this that they're a ghost.
And to the extent to which it's metaphorical is, I guess, open to debate. But there is a spoiler alert. There's a ghost fight where I wrote down in my notebook, "Can you stab a ghost?"
You can spray him with bear spray.
So anyway, I think my overall take, and I said as much in my intermission piece on this, is that this is a really well done piece, very well written, very well acted. They build very good atmosphere. It knows what it's trying to say. Often a frustration that I have with ghost stories and horror theater in particular is that they try too hard to be scary and surprise the audience, often at the expense of its themes. And I think thematic consistency is the name of the game here. They have things on their mind and they do a good job of getting us there, because it's all about how all 4 characters, are trying to free themselves from the painful memories attached to the deceased. But I guess, and I said this in my intermission review too, I've never seen a horror play, a self-described horror play, that's actually good at being scary and therefore actually good at being horror. There's theater has an uphill battle when it comes to this. You can kind of create atmosphere differently in film than you can in theater. And I'm not somebody who likes horror movies, but because I don't like being scared, but I've never seen a horror play that actually succeeded in scaring me. And I'm a wimp. It should be easy to scare me. You were pointing at me. Do you have an example of one that
I wasn't totally scared, but when the seance transitioned into the ghost fight and Eleanor is possessed, there was a person in the audience who literally shouted, "Oh, fuck."
Yeah, and I'm not saying nobody can be scared.
The whole element was working with them. I mean, it got a laugh from the audience.
Yeah.
Because they all thought it was but this person was legitimately squirming in their seat scared
but
at that point in the story.
There's also a difference between being compelled by a well-told story and being legitimately scared. That person could be thrown off guard by, oh shit, what's going to happen? Eleanor, run, get out of there. But I don't know, and I'm not telling them that they didn't actually get scared. Great. That seems to be the stated goal of this piece. But again, part of me, I feel like I would have liked this play more if it wasn't trying to be a horror. You could do a ghost story that's not a horror story, I think is, and because, you know, ghosts are symbolically charged creatures that represent guilt and grief and the past and unfinished business. There's so much you could do with ghosts that, I don't know, I think it's sort of forcing itself into a genre that feels like it should fit but doesn't. And in a medium like theater, if this was a movie, I might be feeling differently. Like, you can make a good horror movie out of this premise, but as a stage play, I don't know if it really gets there. And that's my biggest critique of a play that I otherwise really enjoyed and thought everyone was giving very strong work. What about you? You also
I agree. Everybody gave really strong performances. The cast had really good chemistry. I mean, I'll give a special shout out to Sydney Watson as Macy, because that was such a fun character. As like the medium, not medium, and just that bitchy, hippie energy she brought. She was such a mixed bag of a character in the best way possible. Where, like, you didn't quite know where you were going with her, but then when the turn happens with that character, it's like, oh.
Yeah, no, it's a very well constructed plot, very compellingly performed characters. And like, Macy was ridiculous in a lot of ways, but I felt things for her once we find out how she's actually connected to the main story, not just a happenstantial medium who happened to show up. But
I will say the only moment that kind of stood out to me, not the best way, was, once again, Malcolm Green did a great job as Jordan, but Jordan has that one monologue in the play that I kind of felt was a bit sledgehammery, like didn't quite have that other nuanceness that other parts of the show had. So maybe refine that a bit in the future and remount it. Like, there's that one monologue that kind of went, oh, this feels a bit.
I would generally agree with you on that. I think, because Jordan, he's a bit of an enigma for most of the play. Like, you kind of understand where he's coming from, but you feel like there's a lot of backstory that we're not being told. So I understand the compulsion towards putting that monologue in there, but maybe there's a way of tightening
a different way.
I
will say the sound design was a bit loud at the beginning. I don't know if it was when you saw it, but at the beginning the sound design was very loud, so it was hard to hear the podcaster's first monologue about the steps of grief. So that was
I feel like I saw it later than you, and they probably did refine those levels a bit, because I didn't specifically notice that.
I will say I like the fact they used all the levels in that space.
Well, especially with the title of the Bluffs and it being like a cliffside cabin. Like, once they evacuate from the crumbling establishment, the spoilers, and they utilize the balcony of the TPM main space very well. They do a good job of using those levels. One kind of another, like, this is such a tiny critique and it feels unnecessary to even say, but I'll say it. It was a thought that occurred to me, is that Shalana as Eleanor, she did a great job. This isn't a critique against her as an actor. She just kind of seems too young for this character, in my opinion. That there's an element of life, like, I don't know how old she actually is. She could just have a very youthful face and maybe be older than she looks. But like, there's just an element of, this is someone who's already married, had tremendous marital troubles, and is now widowed. Like, it just seems like there's a lot of life experience that I think an older performer would have, I'm not saying I didn't buy it, but it took a lot for me to buy into it, which I didn't come around to just because the performance was very compelling. But I do think, that I think Shalana maybe would have been better cast as Macy. Not that I want Sydney Watson gone, because Sydney Watson was great as Macy. But I do think someone a little older playing Eleanor would kind of feel more fitting to the life experience we're supposed to believe that this character had. I'm not saying it's impossible that someone that age could have this life experience, but they're just, she's very like, a sunny demeanor in a lot of ways, very young, kind of maybe when we first meet her, she seems a little naive. And someone who's been through all of this, I would think would seem a little more world-worn, jaded, and a little older, I think would maybe.
I could see that. Like maybe somebody more in their 40s.
Yeah, that feels like the
playing Eleanor more like almost like early 30s.
I would even say like the actor to me looks like she's in her 20s. I don't know, but yeah. So and it's a shame because again, I'm not saying it's a major problem, but I just think there's some buying into it that it took me a while to get there. Especially in the early on, you're getting exposition, you're putting the pieces together and trying to figure out what's even going on in this play. That this looks like a very young person to then be told that all these things happened. It requires some suspending of disbelief, I guess.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, overall, though, it definitely was one of the more solid pieces I saw that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, so did I.
The ghost fight at the end got a bit big and dramatic, but once again, I think that's part of this whole ghost story thing. I mean, it did take me out a bit with the whole bear spray in the eyes. And like, you would not just be standing calmly after that. You would be screaming and writhing in pain. From getting bear spray. There's a reason why bear spray is one of the more, potent things to spray at a bear.
It's got to take down a bear.
Yeah. It'll take down a bear, which means it'll definitely take down a person. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure it can cause permanent blindness as well. So,
which I believe that's what she's in store for at the end of it, but.
Could be. I mean, the makeup work was really good.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very well done, especially with the distance. Like, I believe it looked bloody enough. Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, solid piece for sure. Yeah. Awesome. Well, that wraps up part 2, Ryan. We got through quite a bit there. Woo!
Yeah, that was a lot of shows.
Yeah.
We did it.
Part 3 is just as many.
Yes, but Jill's going to do most of the talking in that one because her absence in this one means that most of the remaining shows are hers, but we will also be chiming into a lot of those.
Absolutely. Because, there's a lot of shared shows between the 3 of us in part 3, so that's a fun one there. But anyway, Ryan, before we go, give us a classic Ryan Borochovitz send-off we all know and love.
I'm not going to do the usual send-off, as I often do with these Fringe things, because I say contentious things about some of these shows. If somebody has a problem with anything,
poked a bear, potentially.
Yeah, I poked a bear. Haha, I get the spray. If anyone has a problem with me personally, I'd rather you send that ire to me, not to the Cup. So you can contact me on Instagram, which I never use, but I check occasionally at just Ryan Borochovitz, all one word. It's just my name. Yeah, send your angry complaints to me there. If you have interesting comments and yes ands to a lot of what we've said, please put them in the comments of this episode. Like, share, subscribe, follow Cup of Hemlock Theatre at COH Theatre on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And Cup of Hemlock Theatre podcast in the podcast places where you might be listening to this. Cup of Hemlock Theatre on YouTube where you might be watching this. How about you, Mac? Where can people find and follow you?
Follow me at Mackenzie on all social media platforms. You can follow my musical theater antics over at Before the Downbeat, a musical podcast. We're currently between seasons, but we will be returning soon with the new season 6. So stay tuned for that. There's some goodies in there for sure. But until then, everybody, we'll say stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you all in part 3 of our Fringe Review Roundup. Cheers!